Okay, I think we are good to reconvene at just about 1:30, the 113th meeting of the Mass Gaming Commission. We are at the 8th and last item on the agenda, which will be conducted by Ombudsman Ziemba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you know, today the Commission is deciding on a number of outstanding surrounding community petitions for the cities of Cambridge and Saugus relative to the wind proposal and Everett related to the Mohegan Sun proposal. I'm very happy to report that Somerville has been designated as a surrounding community by the Mohegan Sun folks, and as a result, they will not be a subject to the petition reviews today.
Great.
By way of context, so today we will review the petitions and the responses by the applicants and the communities that are seeking to be designated by the Commission as surrounding communities. In addition, on the same date, not subject to a back and forth between the parties, but we will also make designations relative to a number of cities and communities that were designated by applicants in either the application or after the application. And those communities, the importance of our written designation, even though they were already designated by the applicants, the importance of our written designation is that it kicks off the 30-day statutory period for negotiation of a surrounding community agreement. With that, I understand that we may have representatives from the City of Boston. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you,
that would like to provide some input regarding today's discussion.
Yeah, we're going to go a little bit out of order because we do have the Mayor of Boston here, and we are always deferential to public figures. Last night, we received something called the City of Boston's Declaration of Host Community Status, which is a new one on us. But we understand that Mayor Walsh would like to speak to that, so you're invited to do so, and we will pick up thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the committee members. I'm pleased to be here today. This is my 74th day as mayor of the City of Boston, roughly about 1,754 hours as mayor of the city. I respect the work that this commission is undertaking, but the importance of this issue to the residents of the City of Boston brings me here today. The potential impact of casinos goes to the core of the quality of life of our neighborhoods. I speak as someone who was a member of the legislature when this gaming legislation was debated and enacted in the legislature. The right of the most impacted public to vote was critical to the legislature for allowing casinos in Massachusetts. This sense of duty to the people and the law is what brings me here before you today, and I welcome the opportunity to be heard, and I thank you for that. The people of Boston deserve the democratic process. My priority is the people of Boston, and I know you care about the citizens as well. My office hears daily from the city's residents asking me to fight on their behalf. They're asking me why they don't have an opportunity to have a vote when one of the casinos is accessed solely by a Boston roadway. They're asking why don't they get a chance to vote when their neighbors who got a chance to vote twice. The law allows and discusses multiple host communities, and that is what we are here for today. I am committed to protecting the interests of the people and residents and businesses of the great city of Boston, especially those impacted neighborhoods of Charlestown and East Boston. My priority is fighting for the public right to vote. I stand here before you on behalf of the people, bringing their voice and representing their interests. The City of Boston, in our opinion, is a host community to both proposals, Mohegan Sun and Wind Resorts. Boston is an integral and vital part of each development regarding its site, the construction, the use, the operation, the planning, the amenities, the marketing, access, and appeal of each project. Each accesses its project through the City of Boston. Each project is intimately related and cannot be disentangled from the City of Boston. Each project depends on Boston, airport, bus, rail services, harbor tunnels, roadways, and other means of transportation, its retail stores, restaurants, museums, cultural institutions, tourist attractions, and other institutions, public safety, public health, and other city services, and the many amenities of the City of Boston. The City of Boston is the crucial component to the key selling point of the proposed gaming establishments. Host community truly defines and reflects the City of Boston's status as a destination for the casinos in Region A. I ask this commission to join me in recognizing Boston as a host community and do not compromise in any way the due process rights of the city residents. Therefore, I ask the commission not to designate the city as a surrounding community today. I ask that you consider what we have filed, most recently, an extension request and a declaration of host status. I ask that you respect the City of Boston residents and not join the casinos in cutting the people of Boston out of the process. And thank you for the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor. Does anybody want to say anything directly to the mayor before we, I think we might as well, as long as we're doing this, we might as well deal with the Boston issue in this sequence. Before we go back to John, does anybody have any questions for the mayor?
Well, I have a question about, I guess about procedure, Mr. Mayor. We've been meeting through our representatives with your staff for months now to try to facilitate some resolution of the obvious issues that are before us and that you've addressed yourself to today. And yet it was only yesterday at 2 o'clock that we got this request for an extension. Another extension. And it was at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon that we got this designation of host community. It seems to me, and I know you agree, that the process is really important here, and the thoughtful ability to deal with the issues that these petitions and this legislation, quite frankly, raises. And so I'm curious as to why the secrecy surrounding this. We were talking with your representatives at 4 o'clock, asking them what was being planned, and told that they didn't know what was being planned, and then at 5 o'clock we get this declaration. I certainly would like to take a look at it. I think there are procedures for dealing with it. I understand your position, but I don't understand the secrecy.
If I may, Commissioner McHugh, I'm Tom Frangillo from the law firm of Fish & Richardson, and I represent the City of Boston in connection with the proceedings before you. First and foremost, I don't think there's been a question of secrecy about the City of Boston's contention and declaration that it is a host community here. It's a position that has been taken consistently by the city in a number of documents, and you may recall that earlier this year there was a filing with the commission that the city was taking the position, admitting for the purposes of meeting your deadline, that it was a surrounding community, but it was reserving its right to declare host community status. A letter was written by the Gaming Commission on January 10th, specifically requesting Boston to advise the Gaming Commission of whether or not it was going to declare host community status. That was the day after the mayor's inauguration. And now that he has been in office, as you know, for a short period of time, and his legal team has been assembled, we're fully prepared to address these issues. And I think that one of the things that has happened here is that the cart is being put before the horse on this issue of surrounding community status. The host community status has to be addressed first, because if it is determined that Boston is a host community, Boston has a right to vote. And if that were to happen after a license were to be issued, then the license would be invalidated. And there'd be time, effort expended by this commission, which is valuable, and all of the applicants that would go to naught. And one of the problems is it is a disputed issue right now. The city's position is it is a host community. The position of both of the applicants is it isn't. And the problem is we have a very elaborate statutory scheme, the Gaming Act, that does not address the issue that's before us. There is a grant of authority in here specifically for the Gaming Commission to address surrounding community status. It's Section 17 of 23K. The powers and regulatory powers of the Commission are enumerated in Sections 4 and 5. There's about 60 of them. And the legislature, when they enacted this elaborate regulatory scheme, did not include a provision that addresses what happens when there is a dispute over host community status. And the problem is further complicated because the definition of host community has necessarily built into it legal determinations, not simply factual determinations. Just for example, the question of access to a particular facility. That is a legal question. The Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts has ruled definitively that access to a use takes on the use. In both of these particular applications, let's talk Everett for a moment. The only access to Everett legally is right now Horizon Way, which is located primarily in the city of Boston. Today, if a casino were open there, the only door to that house is through the city of Boston. And a house without a door is not a casino. Nobody can get in, nobody can get out. So an integral part of the Everett application right now by Wynn is how do you get in? And sitting here right now, all that you have before you is a legal, established access way and a conjectural, hypothetical road that hasn't been built, and as far, I believe, as the Commission knows, there's not even a definitive agreement on any of the land to build the road. So that particular application, in and of itself, under Supreme Judicial Court rulings and with the issue of access, falls in Boston. And if, again, and I'm sure that you have, if you look closely at the Wynn application, you'll see that Wynn has entered into contractual relationships with amenities located in Boston. It has a contract, a binding, what they call partnership, with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. It has a binding partnership with the TD Garden, both of which are located in Boston. Going back to the definition of host community, it's clear that host community encompasses the amenities. Those amenities are in Boston. And this has been portrayed to you through the proceedings that I've read. Granted, I was not a participant in those, but I've read every single word of these transcripts. This is a black and white case for the Commission. We're not going to use any aspect of Boston. We've got our boundary lines drawn in a way that is only Everett. At best, what you have right now is a conjectural hypothetical road, a contingency of something that might happen or might not happen. I've recently been told by the applicant that in the event that the MBTA property is not sold or otherwise an access right given across that property to the casino location, and if it is sold by the MBTA through a bidding process to another entity, that the city of Everett, with its newly developed redevelopment authority, is going to come in and take it by eminent domain. I'm not sure if you've been made aware of those facts, but all this goes to the issue of host community. And I could go on.
Well, I understand that, and I'm grateful for that, and that, you know, that is a thoughtful analysis of what's before us. But it comes in the context of something that was not fully developed in that fashion beforehand, and it comes as a dramatic surprise, as opposed to a petition so that we all could reason together and think about the appropriate solution, think about how to solve this problem, think about how to address those issues collectively, which is what, frankly, we've been trying to do since last October. And it seems to me that the citizens of Boston, and the citizens of the surrounding communities deserve, and I know you agree, the kind of thoughtful approach and the kind of thoughtful dissection of the issues that you've raised that they're entitled to. And I know this commission is committed to that. But it's very hard. I mean, I can't respond to everything you've said here today. I understand the points that you're making, and I think that we need to respond to it. But it's very hard to do that if we get a presentation like this, which is helpful, but out of the blue without any advance time for thought. So,
And again, with respect to the commission, Mayor Walsh has only been in office since January. the issues are infinitely complex here. They're not straightforward. We're interpreting a law of which there's only been, I think, one reported judicial decision so far. And so this requires a complete understanding of zoning issues, real estate issues, analysis of thousands of pages of document. We have done that. We understand what the issues are. But it is a new administration with a new legal department with outside counsel prepared to address all these issues.
Well, if, I don't want to prolong this. You understand my point, I understand yours. I think that the way to deal with this is to work collaboratively to see it through, and that means giving notice and creating a procedure to work it through and come to grips with the issues that you've just described so that we can get to an answer, not only an answer, but the best answer that we can, given the complexity of the issues with which we're dealing. I know you don't disagree with that either.
I don't disagree with that, and I know that that your agenda had slated for today this issue of designation of a surrounding community. And for the reasons that I started with, I'll just repeat because I think that they are really vital to what happens here today, is we cannot put that cart before the horse. This process is well along down the road, and it is a process that, by virtue of this very proceeding, is supposed to be a completely transparent one. It's live streamed, there's cameras, everything is recorded. For the citizens of the city to have their rights fully protected, the issue of their status as a host community has to be fully vetted, and it has to be determined before any other question of surrounding community status can be reached.
But just for the record, it has been resolved, the fact that the mayor has been new for 74 days. There was another mayor before him, and that mayor operated presumably in good faith, the legal team and so forth. So, don't be disingenuous about this. This process has been going on for a long time. This specific issue has been addressed at least twice. So we're gonna deal with what you've put on the table. But, let's not quibble that you haven't had time to talk about this, or that this is the cart before the horse. The host community issue was started last summer and has been resolved, as I said, at least twice.
Chairman Crosby, with all due respect, at the hearing on September 4, you asked what I thought was a very poignant question of the Wynn applicant. And you asked the Wynn applicant whether or not the plans with respect to how the parcel, the Monsanto chemical site parcel, had been divided, and there was a parcel B and a parcel C, and you asked the question of whether the plans had been produced to the city of Boston, and that was over 6 months ago. And when you were asked that question, the response was no, that they had not. And your next point was, right on point, this package, you're saying that these are the sine qua non documents that demonstrate that, in your view, Boston is a host community, is not a host community. That seems to me a pretty reasonable set of documents that you would give to the city. And I'm asking, have you given them to the city? And if not, why not? And Ms. Sinatra stepped in and said that she thought that everything was publicly available, which it was not.
What's the relevance of this?
The point is that documentation that are vital to the issue of host community status that was addressed back in September, and when you pointed out, you need to give these documents to
So you're
to
now
the city.
saying that the documents were never delivered?
No, wait, just a minute. now,
We
because
do not.
Just a minute.
We
just a
don't
minute.
have those documents.
Just a minute. We got together at the end of October, and there's another transcript in which we went through document by document, about 6 documents, and at that time, they were given to the city, to Ms. Della Russo, and it was 2 days after that that we got a joint message from Ms. Della Russo and the Wynn representatives saying that they were proceeding. Just a minute. Could I finish? We got an email from Ms. Della Russo and the Wynn representatives saying that they were proceeding on a surrounding community, to try to negotiate a surrounding community agreement. And we said at that time, this was long before you were involved, we said at that time, before they left that day, after the exchange of documents, that if they could not come to some kind of a resolution, we were prepared to have an immediate adjudicatory hearing. And so those documents, and they said they didn't need the hearing. So those documents were not in their hands then, and we expressly made them turn them over at that hearing. So that's what the chairman's talking about.
We have an incomplete production of documents. Documents pertaining to the hypothetical road, we've never seen them. I don't see how this project proposal over at Wynn, for example, could be ruled upon without looking at those documents.
Let's just focus on two things. You're making a declaration, we're going to address that. But don't come in here and say that we've been putting the cart before the horse. What you want to do is rearrange the cart and the horse. You're welcome to try it, that's fine. But we've been talking about what you're referring to as the horse for a long, long time. You're interpreting the documentation differently from your predecessors. I assume that's probably your right. But don't give us a lecture about doing the cart before the horse when it's you who want to rearrange the two.
Most respectfully, I've seen the submissions that were filed before you by the city in January, even after the new mayor came in, detailing what had and had not been produced, what had been redacted. And
So you're looking at those documents differently from your predecessors?
no, I don't say that at all. I've seen a trail of requests that have not been completely fulfilled.
So when your predecessors told us that they had agreed to be a surrounding community, they were wrong, right?
The documents that I've seen filed with this commission, because when the new mail came in, was that the city was prepared to state that it was a surrounding community with reservation of its right to declare host status. And I read the letter that the Gaming Commission wrote to the city right after the new mayor was inaugurated on January 10 of 2014, saying, if the city determines that it qualifies for host community status before such date, the city could notify the commission. Further, as noted by the commission previously, host community status will be part of the RFA2 evaluation process. So I'm looking at a document that came from the commission,
After the new mayor, but
but in any event, requesting a declaration of where do we stand on this, and you have that. And so, I understand that there's history that we did not participate in, and it probably is futile at this point to discuss all the details of which there may be disagreements about. The real question is, where do we go from here? And I do think there is a legal issue about where and how the question of host community status should be resolved. But I do believe that that issue necessarily has to be resolved before any question of surrounding community status. If it isn't, it creates a legal error and the entire process gets turned upside down.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's deal with Boston first. Where are we in that process in the view of our esteemed staff giving the current location of the cart and the horse?
So, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we've had very little time to review the submission from the City of Boston. There were recent meetings, a recent meeting of the commission where both parties, the City of Boston and the Wynn applicant had some testimony before the commission. There are a number of communications that followed that meeting. We had been in contact with the city to try to determine whether or not the information sharing was proceeding between the parties. The Wynn applicant and the Mohegan applicant both met with the city a number of different times between the last meeting and today. We received this declaration of host community status. As council indicated in that January 10th memo from the commission, we did indicate that the City of Boston could so indicate host community status to the commission. Not before the submission. As of last evening, have they ever asserted that they are a host community? They had always reserved that right. So this is a new matter pending before the commission. I will note that what we've been trying to do is implement the act on a statewide basis, as I think has been the mandate by the legislature, and that consistently what we've been trying to do is ensure that the Commonwealth gets the benefit of what was been put forward in the act, namely that the Commonwealth can take advantage of very significant revenues and tax revenues, and that there are very significant jobs that are related to these facilities. Within that context, I noted at the beginning where we are today. We have a number of surrounding communities that have been designated by applicants. We have petitions before the commission to be designated. And the importance of that date is that what we decide today will in the end have a very big impact upon what our timeline is. What we've been trying to do is ensure that we get these licenses issued as quickly as we possibly can, giving due deference to all of the communities across the state. But to the degree in our process, the scheduling is dependent upon any one particular community. So to the degree that we cannot decide on one community, that means that the entire process comes to a halt. Because under our regulations and under the standards, we cannot issue a license until all surrounding community agreements are resolved. And to the degree that there's a dispute regarding a particular surrounding community, albeit through an arbitration or otherwise, we cannot issue our licenses. And so we sit here with the question of what should we do regarding Boston's petition as of last evening to be a host community within the context of the statewide implementation of the law and what we need to do regarding surrounding communities.
Well, I think you've used the right phrase. The document, that's why I raised the question about the secrecy and the last-minute nature of this. I know there's a long history, but trying to think through now on a fly what we do with respect to something we didn't see coming until 5 o'clock last night, at least the timing of it, does not make for good decision-making in the abstract, and it's a shame. But it seems to me that you have perhaps purposely put this in its right context. The document's entitled A Declaration of Host Community Status. I think that we could well treat that as a petition for recognition as a host community and work quickly with both the city and its able team and with the two applicants to put together an adjudicatory hearing at which we listen to the arguments and look at the facts. We have primary jurisdiction here because this is a question of both fact and law. You can't separate the fact from the law. The law is there in the definition, and counsel pointed to the correct definition. We all agree of where the definition is. And so we treat this as a petition for declaration of host community status, look at the facts and the law, and make, as we're required to make, a determination as to whether or not the city is a host community as to one or both of those projects. The agenda for today was to recognize the surrounding community status that was embodied in both the application and the acceptance for both projects. I would like to talk further about that, but it seems to me that whatever we do, we ought to get the ball rolling on a procedure for resolving the host community question.
I had two additional thoughts to that. One is, well, first of all, I think we ought to see whether we can get the surrounding community timeline running, whatever we're going to do. Clearly, the parties are not going to come to an agreement. If they aren't a host community, or maybe if they are a host community, it's going to go to arbitration. So we don't want to, whatever we do on the issue of addressing the petition to be a host community, I would hate to have it get tacked on to the 60-day cycle that we thought we were going to be starting today. So I want to put out there, can we think about that? Number one. And number two, I agree that we have to have a process for resolving this issue. If I remember correctly, the adjudicatory process is one in which we deliberate in private. And this doesn't strike me as one we want to deliberate in private about.
We don't have to. We're entitled to. We're entitled to.
We may. So would you all agree with me that if we had an adjudicatory process, then we probably did not want,
Right.
we would deliberate in public?
Right. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Yes. Okay, then there's the second issue then, or the first issue. I think we're going to do today was determine whether or not we thought there was a surrounding community status and start that clock ticking. Is that right?
For numerous communities.
For numerous communities, including Boston. And so I would like to start that process. Now, is that a good idea or not? And can we do that?
Well, is that a discussion?
Yeah, it's not a rhetorical question. I really mean genuinely.
No. Coming in here today, that was my judgment as well. I, in thinking this through, am now troubled by this. And this is unfortunately part of the last-minute nature of what we're facing. But I think the potential for a mix-up and things going at cross currents is strong enough that we ought to get the surrounding, the host community thing resolved. We ought to get it resolved within a couple of weeks. And then, based on that, either decide that we have a surrounding community on our hands or we have a host community. I think that proceeding along two tracks simultaneously, in an ideal world, there's nothing inconsistent. Let me back up. There's nothing inconsistent between proceeding on those two tracks simultaneously. I hear council's statements to the contrary, but there's nothing inconsistent about that. You can proceed down a surrounding community track at the same time you're trying to figure out whether you're a host community. And then you're far enough ahead in the game that if it turns out you're not a host community, you've got an agreement and you're ready to move forward. But I think and sense that process will be, that process is unlikely to work in this atmosphere. And I think that the danger of being sidetracked and having all kinds of things going on is too great to try and do both of those. So I've come around to the idea that we ought to get this straightened out as quickly as we can and then go to the surrounding community thing.
I agree. I guess to quite a bit of a degree, we had that parallel track happening, in my opinion, since October.
Right.
Since they said that they were going to be, since the parties said they were going to be proceeding on their surrounding community negotiation, but reserved the right to claim host community status at a later time.
Reserve that right in October. They reserved
Or
it
later on, in January, right. I do want to speak to something that would hopefully help us be as expeditious as possible in this matter, which is some of the assertions from the letter we received yesterday and some of the comments here today, we've heard before from other surrounding communities. I think the question of access is an important one, and the question of property boundaries really needs to be answered to everybody's satisfaction, especially this commission. But the question about proximity, we've heard before. That I remember very well a number of Lancaster citizens saying, I can see the project from my property and I didn't get to vote on it. Some of the assertions made here today would have us have a host community be in just about any other surrounding community in the other regions. That would be true for Foxborough, would be true for Holyoke and Chicopee. If anybody was gonna take infrastructure, convenience, and other things in the nearby roadways, for example, be the determining factor of being a host community. Now, I emphasize that the property boundaries and the actual drawing of roadways and access is an important thing that needs to be resolved, but it needs to be focused on that if we're going to move expeditiously to this, to resolve this issue. But I agree that we need to resolve this as soon as possible.
Well, let me just say one thing about that. Council raised an interesting point that I never thought about before. I'm not sure of its ultimate validity, but it's something I hadn't heard before. And that is that the contract with the various venues in Boston made them amenities. Now, I want to hear more about that. I'm not sure I understand that, but I've never thought about it before. But that's why I think we need to get this teed up. We need to get it done in an orderly fashion. We need to get it done without some kind of sudden unveiling, and think it through, clearly. And so that's why I'm not prepared to make any even tentative judgments now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to come down on the side of suggesting that the host community process precede the 30-day or the 60-day gun, even though I'm that. But I do want to just, for the record, point out that we have been heavily criticized by both the city of Boston and by the building trades for not moving fast enough and not getting the jobs done. And we've been trying to move quickly, and we have met with delay after delay, not of our doing. We have also been trying to get the $85 million license fee into this fiscal year, which the legislature and the Secretary of Administration and Finance have been counting on and want. And if we take this delay, that will likely mean that we're going to get pushed outside this fiscal year when we resolve this. And I think all of that is unfortunate, but I don't think that a motion ought to rule the day. And the right thing to do is to ignore some of the obnoxious rhetoric and deal with the petition on its face, straight. I agree with Commissioner McHugh that there have been some issues raised that I've not thought about before. And we should deal with that let's figure it out, but something like a 2-week period. We will resolve at that point whether there is a host community status or not for either of these two communities, and then we will then go from there. And we just live with the slip to our schedule. Anybody disagree with that?
No, I don't disagree. I think it's unfortunate that we will be sleeping potentially more than a few days if this question drags any longer, but better resolve it sooner rather than later, obviously.
Yep, I would agree. Ombudsman Siemba is 2 weeks, and General Counsel Blue, enough time to prepare and schedule an adjudicatory hearing?
Yes, it is.
Well, let me think about this. So apparently there are some arguments here about host community status that we've not heard before. So how would this process work? If we do a 2-week process, tell me exactly what the process would be.
So what we would do is we would schedule an adjudicatory hearing by way of example, say 2 weeks from today. We would hold a pre-hearing conference with the applicants about a week from today. We would ask that all briefing materials be provided to us right after the pre-hearing conference. We can have a pre-hearing conference sooner, but to give people some time. We would ask that they submit any materials to us by no later than the Monday or so before the hearing, so that the commission has time to review it and that they share it with all parties.
But would we have had time to do the proper kind of research to think through, for example, there's this reference to an SJC case that says access is imputed as use. Will we have had time to really think those things through?
We can start doing that right away.
You don't even know what the citation is.
We can find it.
Oh, we
You
can
have to find
Well, I'm
this.
not just, but we don't know what else is in the package.
That's right.
No, well, we will start with what we have already that's been filed. And again, we can move a pre-hearing conference up to have, or sooner to have some of those conversations. We can have the parties in as soon as early next week to start framing the issues.
Now, we could also schedule that adjudicatory hearing, and we don't have to decide right then. So to the point that you're alluding, we could come back to another day after having read or heard all of the presentations and materials, and deliberate back in public, not necessarily that time.
Well, that's
Yes.
true. But also if this is new news to the two bidders as well, presumably, I assume they found out when we found out. So they're going to be invited to appear.
Yes.
And they need to get their cases together, and they too are going to need to deal with these new references. So you think that they've got the time to,
I do. There have been a great deal of conversations about these issues going on since last fall. So while the applicants will have some work to do to prepare for the hearing, I think the issues have been out there. We've all been considering them, and I think that's sufficient time to move it along.
okay.
And if it isn't, I mean, that's a target. And if it isn't, if it turns out that for some reason, that it isn't, we can slip it back and be prepared to do that.
Yeah.
But
If
It's
something
in the-
comes up
in the
in the
ball.
course of the hearing, as Commissioner Zuniga pointed out, we can certainly recess, go back, take a look at issues, get more information, come back again and hear and then deliberate, so.
But the adjudicatory proceeding would help us really frame the discussions, stop this back and forth as to the document that you received that wasn't available, et cetera. It'll all be part of the record as exhibits. So without the deliberation in private, this process could really help us once and for all address the issue.
Yes.
Okay, now, an hour and a half before the declaration came in the request for a 30-day extension. And I guess what we're saying is we're going to basically ignore that and instead declare a call for an adjudicatory hearing on the petition and in 2 weeks. Is that right? Okay. Do we need any, I guess we don't need any motions or anything. We can just tell you that.
no, we have before us what we're treating as a petition for determination of post-community status. We're talking about scheduling a hearing on that petition, and there's no other action item that we need to take today, no vote necessary. We're just talking about scheduling.
Okay. All right, great. What's next?
So, Mr. Chairman, what I suggest is that we proceed to the outstanding petitions that we have for both the Mohegan Sun and Wynn applications.
John, you had another item on your agenda. You had the master licensing schedule, Region C. Are you just, you're going to go ahead with
So,
this
yeah,
topic?
so I was just going to recommend that we put that at the
Fine, okay.
back end.
Fine.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, as you know, the commission heard from representatives from Mohegan Sun and Wynn in the communities on January 28th and 29th. The packet in front of you organizes the materials from that meeting, including very detailed project community petitions and petition responses from the applicants. All of those materials are available on our website. And I'd urge anyone who wants to follow to further take a look at those in the archives for those meetings. Today, we will discuss 6 separate criteria used in the Commission's regulation to help the Commission determine surrounding community status: proximity, transportation infrastructure, development impacts, operational impacts, other impacts, and positive impacts. The petitions, the applicant responses in the staff and consultant reviews found in the packet demonstrate that different criteria are more integral in the determination of surrounding community status for each community. We'll focus much of the discussion today on such areas. So just as a reminder, today we are making decisions relative to Cambridge and Saugus relative to the Wynn proposal, and Everett relating to the Mohegan Sun proposal. Today, we're joined by our team of consultants who helped us review these criteria, including City Point Partners, Green International Affiliates, Dewberry Engineers on construction, water, and wastewater issues. As a reminder, we asked Dewberry Engineers to give us their traffic analysis for the city of Everett that was previously reviewed by the McFarland Johnson team. In addition, Dewberry Associates also did a peer review update of the analysis done by Green International. This further review of the Green International prior work was deemed advisable because it would provide an independent verification of the prior work, which had involved some discussions with McFarland Johnson, whose work posed a potential conflict of interest. One benefit of the Dewberry review is that the traffic reviews to be discussed today have had the benefit of reviews from 4 separate independent teams, and that each one of those teams concur with the recommendations regarding impacts for every one of the communities that are before us. We're
So
not,
John, say that again. 4 different, on the same aspect, like 4 different traffic reviews?
yeah, so we initially, as you know, we had McFarland
Yeah,
Johnson analyzing some, and then we had Green International
Right.
analyzing others. We had the benefit of City Point Partners helping organize the discussion and lead the conversation. These conversations were done as a team. Even though each of the independent groups came up with their recommendations, they were discussed by and among those teams to determine if there are any weaknesses in the arguments and whether or not there's consensus among those groups.
Right.
The Dewberry group came in and did reviews, as I just noted,
Right.
and they concurred with the recommendations
Okay, I
from
getcha.
all of those teams.
Gotcha, yeah.
We're not reviewing today the McFarland Johnson reviews. They're not part of our reviews, but I just will note for the record that they came to the same conclusions.
Okay.
So we're also joined by HLT Advisory on economic issues, LDS Consulting on housing and school impact issues, and our own Mark Vanderlinden, Director of Research and Problem Gaming on issues such as problem gaming, crime, and other operational impacts. At the conclusion of the presentation on each community, I recommend that the Commission deliberate the surrounding community status and make a decision on each. In addition, today there are 2 involuntary disbursement petitions, one related to the Everett application for surrounding community status and one relating to the Saugus petition. After we review each of the surrounding community petitions in those 2 instances, then we can turn to the involuntary disbursement petitions. As we determined by lot, as with all of our proceedings, first we will start with the Mohegan Sun petition, and then we'll finish with the Wynn petitions. With that, I ask you to turn to page 5 of the Everett petition, Everett analysis included in the Mohegan book. So this is the first criteria that we review, which is proximity.
Under A,
Yeah, the A, number 1, A criteria, number 1. So in each one of your, so you have tabbed by Everett, and then you have separate tabs for each of the different criteria. And I'll also refer to page numbers, but each of the criteria is a separate tab. So the first tab, proximity. Everett argues that it borders Revere, and the site is 2.5 miles drive from the shared border that they share. Everett argues that it borders Revere, and the site is a 2.5-mile drive from there. Mohegan agrees that they share a border, states that the project is 1.7 miles away from the closest Everett border, and that the closest residential neighborhood is 6 miles away, but the geographic distance or shared border alone is not sufficient for the surrounding community designation. Instead, the Mohegan Sun team argues that we should base our determinations not solely on the fact of a shared border or whether or not the proximity to the site, but that we should base it also on impacts that is consistent with the way that we have reviewed all of the other petitions, that is a combination of both proximity and impacts. Within that context, first, we turn to the transportation infrastructure impacts starting on section 2, page 11 of your packets. I'm going to ask Rick Moore from City Point Partners to join us and to introduce team members that are here. He's going to give us the benefit of his presentation. He's going to give us a summary of some of the arguments that have been raised by Everett and Mohegan Sun, and together with his recommendation regarding those contexts. He will also At the conclusion of his remarks, he will give us a little bit about the construction and development impacts, which is the second criteria, but it is very much related to the traffic and infrastructure impacts. Rick, thank you.
What page was the final recommendation of the consultant for this on?
So if you take a look at their analysis is found on, so page 11 is his analysis, the executive summary is included in that, and his analysis begins.
I see consultant analysis is on page, yeah, okay, 19.
And that's, I believe that's the executive summary.
That's correct.
Okay,
Commissioners, are you,
I got it.
you ready?
Yeah.
First off, I'm here with several of the traffic engineers who worked on this analysis. In the next row, Frank Tramontosi and Jason Sobel from Green International. And at the end, Miguel Gavano from Dewberry. And they did the majority of the actual analysis that was reviewed, as John said, by many. So we'll talk about first the Everett petition, if we can have the first slide. No, go back. Okay. This is the a base map of the area. This is the city of Boston. This is the casino at Suffolk Downs. This is the boundary of the city of Everett. And what we'll really be talking about today is the traffic that drives through the center of the city on Route 16. But the consultants for the casino distributed the traffic. And basically, I'd just like to summarize that. This is the traffic that's coming to and from the casino. And if you look at these arrows, these 3 arrows essentially are the traffic that go to the north. And if you add those numbers up, you get about 20 to 25% of the traffic going to the north. And then if you look down on the bottom of the screen, there's an arrow that goes through the Ted Williams Tunnel, which essentially is south on 93 to the south and Route 90 to the west. That's about 44 to 45% of the traffic. So if you take those, the north and the south and west traffic out, you're left with the traffic going through the Sumner and Callahan tunnels and the traffic going along Route 16. Both these traffic trips will eventually wind up on 93 going north-south, but they'll get to 93 two different ways. And if you assume, for instance, you're going to the site coming down 93, this is saying that about 25% of the traffic will go through the tunnels, and about 7% of the traffic will cut across Route 16 to the casino. Now, the reason the large majority of the traffic goes through the tunnel is it's a straight shot and there's no tolls going in that direction. Now, if you're leaving the casino and going north on 93, because of the tolls, and because, as you can see, there's a fairly direct access to 93, the traffic consultants are suggesting, and we would agree, that 18% of the traffic leaving and about would go on Route 16, and about 14% would go through the tunnels and up north. So you wind up with about a third of the traffic going north, but the in and the out are slightly different because of the options to get there and the tolling. Now, also, the traffic numbers we're talking about, and as John said, the distance between the casino and the middle of the Everett is about 2.5 miles. But the traffic numbers we're talking about basically come from the original casino proposal, the Caesar proposal in Boston. Now, the new proposal, Mass DOT this week issued a letter requiring the new proposal to do a new traffic analysis, distributing the traffic, new counts, because it's a different complexion of uses. You'll notice up on the top here, they've indicated that the gaming positions will actually go down from 6,000 to 5,000. However, if you look further down, you'll see that the retail will go up. So what Mass DOT is saying is, let's get good traffic numbers for the actual proposed casino, and then redo the traffic analysis. Now, MAPC, the planning agency, has suggested in some of their comment letters that they think more than this 18 and 7% will go on Route 16. That'll be factored into this new traffic analysis. But the long and the short of it is, there'll be some up and there'll be some down. But in the end result, the traffic numbers will be within probably the level of confidence that we'd like to see. So using the old traffic numbers, if you will, is still, we believe, a relevant way to analyze the surrounding communities. Now, if you look at what these 18 and 7% do in terms of the actual traffic on Route 16, let's just go to the next slide. So remember when we talked about the surrounding communities in Springfield, we spoke about the Friday peak hour period. Now, there's many conditions we can look at that tends to be the most significant, so that's what we'll focus on. And if you look at Route 16 through Everett, the roadway volume essentially today is almost 5,000 vehicles, roughly going equal in each direction. If you look at the increase that the casino would generate with the 7% coming in and the 18% coming out, it's about 227 vehicles, and that's about a 5% increase. Now, Mohegan Sun did not analyze that section of Route 16, and that's part of the Everett's contention. But the Wynn proposal did analyze that section. And they looked at the signalized intersection, and they concluded that the signalized intersections along that section, which include Centilli Circle and some of the other, a number of intersections through the intersection of 99 north-south and Route 16, they concluded, the Wynn folks did, that those intersections operated at level of service D or better. Now, in an urban environment, level of service D is considered acceptable. When you get into E and F, when you start to have backups and difficulties. However, if you drill down a little bit farther beyond that overall assessment, you'll find out that 10 out of the 48 individual movements along that corridor actually operate at level of service F. And anybody who's...
By movements, you mean intersections or pieces
Well,
of...
if you're coming into an intersection, you can have a movement through the intersection, you can have a left turn movement or a right turn movement. In many cases, the left turn movements, which are the most problematic, operate at level of service F. The result of that, as you can see in the third bullet, is that at some of these intersections, the queuing spill back into the adjacent intersections. Now, the analysis tools, the computer models they used, are not completely integrated in terms of signal to signal. So there's some acknowledgement that one signalized intersection can back up into the other, but they don't do a terribly good job of interconnecting intersections. There's more sophisticated tools that can do that, but they weren't used in this analysis. Our conclusion is that if you used more sophisticated analysis, that this rather optimistic level of service D would do nothing but degrade because of the queuing issue at some of these intersections. And so we acknowledge that there's a report out there that says the overall intersections operate at level of service D, but that was concluded based on computer models that are generous, if you will, to how individual intersections operate. And you add to that the fact that a number of the intersections are, a number of the movements are operating at level of service F, and you have this queuing and backup issue, is we conclude that that section of roadway in Everett is congested and is at capacity. And by the way, MAPC has also requested a number of their comments that Route 16 be looked at in more detail, and in fact, they think that there could be more traffic on Route 16 than estimated by the casino engineers. So when you add that together, it's our conclusion that there is a potential significant adverse impact on Route 16 because of that casino traffic and the way 16 operates today. Keep in mind that in 10 years, which is the future projection, there'll be still more traffic on Route 16, and without any improvements, it will just get more and more congested. I will say, as John mentioned, we also looked at the construction vehicle impacts. We did not consider those to be significant. And on a completely separate topic, there was an issue about water and sewer. That is not an issue in Everett. It's not even an issue in Everett. So we're really back again to the traffic impact on what we would consider a congested section of Route 16.
Okay, thank you.
Are there ways to address, or let me ask the question, two different questions. Are you identifying the particular intersections that cause or these cumulative degrading, if you will?
Yes, they have actually been identified in the analysis, and you can pick them out movement by movement, but because there's 48 of it, it's a pretty complicated diagram, and we didn't put it up there. But yes, they are specifically identified, each one of them.
The 10 out of the 48 ones?
Yes.
And are there pragmatic ways to resolve, at that level of service, or at that cumulative level of service, are there ways to resolve by additional signaling or more synchronization, or
Well,
are we talking lane widening, or is it something?
The first thing you would look at, and the most cost-effective, is signal timing. And you could look at the signal timing and change it and optimize it, particularly if you looked at the corridor as operating at one, rather than isolating individual signals. And if you interconnect, essentially, the signals, you can get a much more fluid movement. Another mitigation measure that would not be that would be cost-effective, it seems to us, is in a number of these left-hand turn pockets. For example, if a left-hand turn pocket has capacity for 3 or 4 vehicles, and the analysis says that in the peak time you have 6 vehicles that want to use that pocket, you could conceivably, because the median along Route 16 there is wide in some cases, you could extend the left-hand turn pocket to accommodate those 6 vehicles. That would get them out of the main barrel, and the main barrel would move more smoothly. So those are those are the kinds of things that you'd look at first.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rick. Rick addressed the factor of development in his presentation. So if we can now move to the operational factor, please turn to page 135 in the Everett analysis. That's section 4. Upon review of the Everett application, Everett's concerned about a number of operational concerns, including housing-related concerns, public safety impacts, particularly related to housing concerns. We, as is our course, we review a number of other potential concerns that have been raised by other applicants, operational type of concerns, including water and wastewater, as Rick just mentioned, impacts on local businesses, and other issues related to problem gaming and crime. So I'm going to ask our folks from HLT to come join us, and so I'm going to ask Lyle Hall from HLT Advisory, Lynn Sweet from LDS to join us at the table. We'll approach the operational concerns as a group, and Mark Vanderlyn, and if he could come join us as well. What I'm going to first do is I'm going to ask Lyle to go over his analysis of the application and the concerns as they relate to business impacts. Then I'll turn to Lynn, and she can give us the benefit of her analysis on housing-related issues and school-related issues. And then I'm going to turn to Mark for the analysis on those other areas that I discussed. Lyle?
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, Commissioners. You'll have to pardon my hoarse voice. I have not transitioned well to the southern climate down here in terms of temperature.
Too warm for you, is it?
It's just a bit too warm, Commissioner. HLT's role in the surrounding community discussions was focused on local retail, entertainment, and service establishments, and the impact and operation from a Category 1 casino on those establishments. Excuse me. In each of the applications that you will hear today and that we'll go through, the potential surrounding communities assert that the operation of a Category 1 casino will have a negative impact on the surrounding community, notably on specific and individual retail and entertainment businesses, with a primary focus on the business or the business volume that those entities will lose as a result of competition from the Category 1 casino. Some communities have provided more detail than others to substantiate their support and claim, but in most cases, the claim has been a fairly generic one in terms of a region-wide loss in business with very little substantiation provided for it. The approach we took was similar to what we've looked at in Region B and really focused on three areas. One, the concept of demand substitution, and that is that a dollar of spending in a gaming environment, whether it's on a gaming activity or a non-gaming activity, is not necessarily a one-to-one transfer from a dollar that might have been spent on some entertainment or retail or food and beverage use elsewhere in the community. And I would point out that there's no empirical evidence that supports a one-to-one relationship on that transfer, including the two studies that were done for the Commonwealth, one by Innovation Group and one by Spectrum Consulting. Secondly, and more importantly, though, is what we refer to as the repatriation of gaming dollars. We've mentioned before that University of UMass Dartmouth does an annual study looking at the amount of gaming revenue spent by Massachusetts residents in neighboring, or casinos located in neighboring jurisdictions, and that amounts to somewhere north of $700 million annually. We believe that a substantial portion of that will be repatriated and spent within the Massachusetts environment, certainly where the largest population concentration is in the greater Boston area, where the two applicants that we're currently considering. And therefore, we're not really even talking about a substitution of dollars. We're talking about bringing those dollars back and having them spent here. And finally, we looked at consideration of the positive impacts from both the operation of these Category 1 licensees in terms of what they're doing for employment, the goods and services they're buying, and the people that are visiting them, not only from within the immediate area, but from further afield. And that varies by applicant. But as a general rule, and based on these points, we found that operationally there's been very little, or could be very little negative impact on any of the surrounding communities. I won't repeat that when we go through the other two, but let me just spend a few minutes talking about Everett, which is the one that we're dealing with right up front. It might be worthwhile just as a real quick summary in terms of what the Mohegan Sun, Massachusetts proposal is, just in terms of content and where some of the concern is coming from. We're talking about roughly 170,000 square foot casino with about 4,000 slot machines and 120 table games, 2 hotels, and about 20 food and beverage outlets containing about 3,500 seats, and a 38,000 square foot multi-purpose room that could seat up to 1,000 people, and also a substantial retail environment. Now, the city of Everett states that it would be, and I'll quote, significantly and adversely affected by the operation of the gaming establishment after its opening, taking into account such factors as negative impacts on local retail, entertainment, and service establishments. Excuse me. However, Everett provides virtually no detail other than that one sentence in terms of quantifying or talking about the type or the nature of the impacts. The applicant, on the other hand, has submitted a number of background documents that speak to the positive impacts that result from the casino, including the direct employment in the order of 3,000 people, FTEs, whose salaries obviously will be spent in the immediate area and could conceivably be spent or trickle out into those retail and entertainment establishments. The purchase of goods and services to operate the casino, somewhere in the order of $100 million a year, 50 million of which by agreement in the host community agreement will be spent within a 15-mile radius of the casino, and about 1 million visits to the casino that will come from outside the Suffolk, Norfolk, Essex, and Middlesex counties. with estimates up to $20 million on amount that will be spent on non-gaming activities that could be in restaurants or local service stations and retail environments. As a result, when we go through that and look at the balance on the potential negative and the clear positive aspects of this, we cannot agree with the City of Everett that, in fact, there is any negative impact, or nor likely to be as a result of the Category 1 casino. John?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Lynn, if you can give us the benefit of your analysis.
Sure. With regard to Everett, I was asked to look at housing, school, and code enforcement impacts. And of the 3 petitions we looked at today, this is the only one that actually had a little bit of information provided by the petitioner with regard to some demographics and a letter from the town planner. The other 2 that we're going to speak about did not have any information or requests on these matters. So I'm going to do the same thing by giving you kind of a general overview and then not repeat it in the next two statements. So in the Everett petition, they are suggesting that approximately 2,500 full-time jobs will be created on site. And the proposed casino is in walking distance to the Blue Line and 4 bus lines. We did provide you with an MBTA map, and this should allow workers to travel by public transportation from all areas of Boston to the site. The developers have committed to having 75% of positions filled by persons living in a 15-mile radius of the casino. We also gave you a map of that and went further to say that 20% will be filled by Revere residents. The area that we looked at encompasses much of routes 93, 95, and 128 going to the north up to North Reading, west out to Concord, and south to Norwood. That 15 miles is a pretty broad area. So we looked at demographics in just 8 communities that kind of are hugging the coastline. So we studied a much smaller area than that 15 miles. We also reviewed a study that was provided by the Innovation Group, and that study had a number of case studies of communities that were in urban areas, and they specifically looked at impacts to school and housing. And they concluded that casinos that are being built in urban areas that are already populated and have infrastructure in place do not see impacts in housing and in schools. They also went a little bit further and talked about the Mohegan Sun property in Connecticut and stated that there were housing shortages there because it was a suburban, in fact, a rural area of the community that didn't have the roads, the infrastructure, and the housing in place. And we agree with that assessment. The Everett Casino is located, as I stated, close to major transportation routes, which will allow workers, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the housing. So we looked at a couple of demographics. We looked at unemployment in the 8 communities. In the 8 communities, there's 32,000 persons in Massachusetts, in these communities as of December 2013 that are unemployed, and that's about 10 times more than the 2,500 jobs. More jobs than job seekers, basically. We looked at housing and vacancy rates in these 8 communities and identified 3,300 vacant housing units, more if you were to add in Everett and on the other petitioner in Everett. So 9 times more vacant housing units than jobs being created. We also, just because this is some of what my office does, we keep a pipeline of units that are in production in Greater Boston, and identified about 30,000 units that are currently permitted in some stage of either permitting or construction. So we also note that the communities, 8 communities we looked at, had a vacancy rate of about 8%, and we talked about this last time, about 5% is an indicator of a need for more units. So we also looked at code enforcement because Everett did raise that as an issue. And we looked at a couple of factors to try and kind of peel back the layers as to whether or not code enforcement could be an issue. And we determined that Everett is what's called a mini entitlement community under the Community Development Block Grant Program. That means that funds flow from the federal government through the state to the community. And in the past 2 years, they have received over $900,000 in community development block grant funds. And that was a very large increase, almost a tenfold increase from what they had received in the prior 2 years. And that money is specifically targeted for infrastructure, housing rehab, and administration. I think the government has recognized their issues in place, and they are providing funding to some degree. We also looked at the fact that their inspectional services department is quite robust compared, I think, to other communities, that they have 19 staff members, 5 code inspectors, and a code admin person as well. In addition, their tax revenue has also been increasing over the last couple of years. It's gone up $4 million. So it was hard for us to come to a conclusion on the code enforcement that there were going to be issues there. On the school-age children, we looked at housing size and school-age population, and they actually have been increasing in Everett. It's actually a contrast to what's going on in most of Massachusetts. And that probably is due in part to a large influx of immigrant population into the community. So at the end of the day, our findings were that Everett will not be significantly and adversely affected by the operation of a Category 1 gaming facility after its opening due to housing or inspectional service impacts resulting from the facility. It is possible, however, that it could experience impacts to its school-age population that might not be offset by state aid. It's just, there are problems there already, and anything could exacerbate it in a minor way. However, given the high unemployment and housing vacancy rates in the community, it's more likely than not that the Category 1 casino will be beneficial to the housing market in Everett, and therefore add to the real estate tax base, as well as increase overall consumer spending in the area.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask Mark to take over from here. For your benefit, Commissioners, his analysis on page 167. At the beginning of each package, there's also an index of where each one of these consultant reports is, but I will give you the benefit of their page numbers as we go forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
So I was asked to take a look at what are the social issues. To state that the Everett petition spoke very generally about an increase social service needs should a Mohegan Sun casino be located. And so that was the information that I took from the petition itself. And then from there, I took a look both at what was contained within the application as well as any additional empirical evidence that would be there. So within the actual application, there wasn't anything that would state specifically that would address that very specific need, but there are several components within the application that would talk about what efforts they would take towards mitigation, whether of social problems, whether it be problem gambling, managing alcohol-related incidents, and so forth. What does the empirical evidence say about these issues? And when we talk more specifically or generally about social service needs, when you take a look at some of the most common ones that people would cite, an increase in problem gambling. There are a couple studies that would actually indicate that, given the proximity, that there may be an increase in problem gambling, at least initially. Probably the most common study would be the Gambling Impact Study in 1999 that showed that there is approximately a doubling in the prevalence of of disordered gambling within a 50-mile radius. There was another study in 2004 that showed that within a 10-mile radius that you have also almost an equal increase in gambling disorders. The complicating factor there is that these prevalence rates tend to decrease after a casino or a new gaming establishment has been open for a couple of years. What is the actual impact, given what the resources are within the community, given the mitigation efforts that would be put forth by the applicant, given a whole host of other factors? I think that it's very difficult to say what the actual increased rates of problem gambling would be within, after a casino would open in that area. There are other questions when we talk more generally about the social issues or social impacts. Another one that often is referenced is increase in crime. As I've stated, and it's very similar, or it's the same evidence that I would be citing previously, is that it's very difficult to tell. What are the impacts of crime within when you open up a casino? There are a number of different variables, both what is the density of population in the area, what are the community resources that are available, what are the mitigation efforts by the casino itself. I would say that the evidence is inconclusive. I would also say that on any of these issues, that this is something that we will be paying very close attention to and to measure, be it problem gambling, be it crime, be it increases in alcohol-related crashes where the person was drinking at the casino prior to hitting the road, a whole host of those factors. Which would lead me to the next one. What is the increase in alcohol-related accidents in the proximity of a casino? There is actually a fair amount of evidence that would say that, yes, indeed, there is an increase in alcohol-related accidents in the proximity of a casino. There are a couple studies, I think, that are very relevant to this. Probably the one that I find relevant, both in terms of when it was done as well as its proximity, is a 2009 Spectrum Gaming Group analysis of gambling in Connecticut. And its original intent was to take a look at the social and economic impacts, but it found a positive correlation between driving while intoxicated and the proximity to a gaming facility over time. So the final one that I would like to just talk about, and this kind of encompasses all of that, is what is the burden on social services? That it seems logical to say if we see an increase in problem gambling, that you would in turn see an increase in the burden on social services. And problem gambling would incorporate or encompass a whole host of issues. It would encompass mental health problems, substance use issues, domestic violence issues. So you should in turn see a fallout and an increased burden on social service agencies within that specific community. As Dr. Williams, Rob Williams pointed out in his analysis of this very specific issue, is that it's a bit more complicated than that. That traditionally you see very low uptake of persons with gambling disorders seeking help, and that typically those issues are resolved in other ways. Will that be the case in Massachusetts? It's very difficult to say. We are taking a much different strategy and a much more aggressive approach to addressing some of these problems. And so would we see an increase in utilization of social service by persons with gambling disorders? I certainly do hope so, but we just simply don't have the evidence that would point to that fact at this point. So in conclusion, I would say that just on the face of it, when they say that we'll see an increase in social issues and burden on social services, it's difficult to say. I would also say that it's something that we are spending an enormous amount of resources and energy taking a look at through our Sigma research group right now on these very specific issues that I've just mentioned.
Mark, in a couple of your presentations, you made reference to the Spectrum report in Connecticut. And, you know, for me, they're just kind of, that's not apples to apples in comparison. You know, you're starting with a real rural destination with limited population. Now we're talking about, you know, a resort casino already in a heavily populated area. Are there other statistics that we can draw from or other examples? I know you're trying to stay close geographically, but is there something that might be a little more apples to apples than what Spectrum pulled out for us?
Sure. There was a 2010 study done by Cotty and Walker that did support the same conclusion, is that there was an increase in drunken driving accidents or crashes within a proximity to a casino. There was a study done by Dr. Richard McGowan, a local researcher, that found a correlation between drunk driving arrests for a county and the presence of a casino within that county. I use the spectrum. You're absolutely right. It is not necessarily apples to apples when we talk about what is the gaming climate in Connecticut versus the gaming climate that would be in the Boston area. And so that's I hear that. There is those other two studies that I would cite, and I imagine there's others, but I have not unearthed those yet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Criteria number 5, other, there really were no presentations by either side on that matter. And then the number 6 is the positive impacts. I think you've heard a number of positive impacts included in the presentations relative to the Everett petition, including $50 million annually spent for local vendors, a very significant percentage of the workforce to be hired from the immediate area of the city of Revere. So with that, commissioners, I put that to you for deliberation on whether or not Everett is a surrounding community.
Comments?
Well, not unlike other determinations of surrounding community, it would appear that the traffic topic is the one that is most relevant to the designation. We've heard many of the arguments on the other categories before. I think that they are very similar in this case. I would be in agreement that as it relates to traffic, particularly to the intersections and given the complexity of the dynamics of Route 16 that Mr. Moore was articulating, that the city of Everett would qualify as a surrounding community. But
Yeah, I would agree, based on the traffic analysis and the numbers that several groups of traffic analysts have looked at and concurred that there will be a significant impact.
I agree. So, make a motion?
Sure. Based on the evidence and discussion presented before this commission, I would move that this commission designate the city of Everett as a surrounding community to the Mohegan Sun application based on the evidence presented relative to traffic, potential traffic impacts.
Traffic, is that limited, is that traffic in the whole city or traffic limited to Route 16 and the feeders to and from Route 16?
Yes, it's limited to Route 16, from what I heard on the evidence. Yes, thank you for that clarification.
That's right, yeah. So does that limit the scope of the surrounding community negotiation? No, if they're a surrounding community, it's open-ended. We're getting them there by way of this issue, but once they sit down and negotiate, you can negotiate anything.
About anything, but what we say as the basis for our finding may guide the arbitrator if it gets there as to what offers more reason.
That's right.
Okay. Any further discussion? Was there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to make Everett a surrounding community to the Mohegan Sun application, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we can now turn to your, the packet book, the original book for the meeting book. The involuntary disbursements petition is included in tab 8C of that matter. So as a reminder, our Regulation 205 CMR 11403, the Commission can approve an involuntary disbursements petition upon a finding that there is a reasonable likelihood that a community will be designated as a surrounding community. I believe as they've been designated as a surrounding community, they passed that test. Number 2, that the request is reasonable in scope. And number 3, that the risk that the community will not be able to properly determine the impacts of a proposed gaming establishment without the requested funds outweighs the burden of the actual financial costs that will be borne by the applicant. On that packet, we outlined the requests from the City of Everett, some socioeconomic impact, a $35,000 grant, additional grant from World Tech for $50,000, and then legal fees for $60,000.
What page are you reading from now, John?
This is page, so 8C,
No, I've got it. I've got the
cover
first
memo.
page. Oh, yeah, the first page. Okay, that's a good place to start.
All right. So the main contention from the Mohegan Sun folks was about the reasonableness of the scope of the services. There were a number of different arguments that they raised about the scope. Particularly, they said that the scope exceeds the $50,000 amount that has been set aside in the statute. This is actually number 5, but the City of Everett raises the fact that the $50,000, although that is included in the statute, that doesn't reflect the reality of the services that have been provided to host and surrounding communities across the whole state. And indeed,
And the statute doesn't say anything about 50,000 as the amount anyway, it's a starting amount, right?
That is-
It
that
makes
is correct.
50,000 available, right?
That is
To
correct.
start.
400.
Yeah, to start.
Mohegan Sun, I'm sorry to be moving up from 5 to 1, but number 4, Mohegan Sun states that it shouldn't be required to pay for the expenses related to its, to the City of Everett's petition to be designated as a surrounding community. Everett states this argument's misplaced. It argues that these expenses are consistent with the Gaming Act and the statute, and that Everett should not be penalized for having to utilize the surrounding community process.
Okay, can I ask you, I'm sorry, are you finished?
For that one, I could go on with the rest, but if you wanted to
Oh,
stop.
no, go ahead, because I have an overall question.
Mohegan Sun also said it's being asked to pay for Everett's campaign against, that should be Revere, excuse me for that. Everett argues that Mohegan Sun's claim is false and that Everett has not campaigned against Mohegan Sun's project. Mohegan Sun argues that the maximum request should not be required up front. Everett argues that its request to receive the entire disbursement up front is consistent with our regulations. Our regulations do require communities to provide us an estimate of the consulting costs and the legal costs that would be necessary for the engagement, and that any costs that are not do not amount to that estimate, that those funds will be reimbursed to the applicant. And then in regard to the scope, Mohegan Sun raises an issue that this is a large amount and that that is a very large scope and that the dollar amount is a large amount. Everett raises the argument, it says that given the pattern of recalcitrance on the part of the applicant, the scope may overestimate the number of such events necessary for council to attend. It also notes that Mohegan Sun will not be charged for meetings not required. I would note on the matter of the argument that Mohegan Sun shouldn't be required to pay up front for every one of the costs. The Everett applicant, Everett petitioner, notes that it could come to an alternative billing arrangement with Mohegan Sun, and if the commission so desires. Commissioner, if you'd like me to answer any questions, I was going to put forward a recommendation on how we could deal with some of these issues if you'd like, or I can answer your questions.
Yes, sir. I didn't understand, on the very last page of this section, there's a chart of some kind. Grant 1, Grant 2, Grant 3, Grant 4, very, very last page. Last page of the whole book.
Yeah.
There it is. And I didn't understand what that was.
So what I did here is I put together, by way of comparison, in order to determine the reasonableness of the approach that the city of Everett has put forward, the voluntary disbursements that Everett has, that the city of Everett has requested of the WIN applicant, because we're dealing with some of the same teams, notably the legal teams. And one item that I will raise is in our review, there was a flat fee for legal services through Phase 2 of the application, including the host community agreement. And then services after Phase 2 on the grant number 2, there was a billing arrangement at $3.75 an hour. The request for this particular request, I believe it is at $4.75 an hour.
Okay,
So these were monies that WIN granted to Everett.
These are monies that WIN granted to the city of Everett,
Okay, so
and they
this-
involved some of the same consultant groups
Right.
as a way of trying to determine whether or not an expense is a reasonable expense.
these are when, I'm sorry.
These are WIN-related expenses, and I'm just using this as a chart to show comparisons between what is being requested versus what was put forward by the WIN team.
What's the Revere reference at the top? Voluntary disbursements, Everett/Revere.
It's background for that.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's just voluntary disbursements for
Everett.
Everett from the WIN applicant.
Okay,
Yep, pardon me.
okay.
Now, are some of the studies that Mr. Moore was describing as he was analyzing the traffic on Route 16, he was cross-referencing for the Mohegan Sun traffic generation, some of the analysis done for WIN.
Yes.
Is there other work that has happened in that realm here that could also be helpful
Well,
to the city of Everett?
neither of the parties had the benefit of the consultant analysis that we put forward today.
Okay.
So neither could predict what their needs would be. In all fairness, I do imagine that the city of Everett will still want to move forward with its analysis of some of those, some of the concerns that it has raised. And consistent with the way that we have treated these disbursements throughout, we do provide some flexibility to the communities to get prepared as they need to get prepared for the agreements or, in this case, the petition for surrounding community status. But given the concerns and the flexibility that counsel for the city of Everett has indicated, I was wondering if it might make sense for the commission to agree to a portion of the full amount that is being requested and ask the parties to get together to see if there is anything that the parties could do to make a determination in regard to billing arrangements or invoices so that there's more comfort related to the overall amount of expense. And then I could bring that forward, that recommendation to you in 2 weeks' time. But if we agree to at least a percentage, that wouldn't hamper Everett as it proceeds with its negotiations.
Well, I have a deeper question. Do we know what WIN has already paid, if I understand this now correctly, World Tech, $180,000, or advanced monies to give World Tech $180,000?
Yes.
To study traffic conditions in Everett, right?
Further.
No, I think the World Tech analysis, I think that was, that is for very specific intersections, Correct, within Everett as they related to the wind projects. I think what we've heard today is that, yes, there is indeed some, for lack of a better word, cross-fertilization of the two projects in terms of analysis, but still there remains some individual questions that would need to be reviewed.
But how do we know that the 50,000 being sought here doesn't overlap the $180,000 that's already been spent?
So that's part of my recommendation, is that the parties can come back to us in 2 weeks' time with the benefit of this analysis and give us perhaps an agreement on what expenses would absolutely be necessary to move forward to analyze this proposal. But I don't want to hamper unnecessarily the city of Everett, given the timetables that we have, and able to be move forward in their reviews.
Well, I wonder if, just on that last point, if that might be something that's better delegated to you as to, determine the reasonability or the incremental nature of these, rather than try to go at it, once every 2 weeks that we meet. I would, for example, just on another note, but related, from what is being sought here by the city, I would strike out the line item that is being sought for economic development analysis, which we already discussed, is something we don't believe makes the city a surrounding community. It's really relative to traffic, and particularly that on Route 16 that we agreed on.
Well, and the city's already, Wynn's already paid $70,000 to the same company for the same
Right.
study.
I had the same thought. I agree. It seemed to me that, it seemed to me that it's reasonable from what we've heard to eliminate the console econ, 35,000. Take your suggestion about something, say 50% of the World Tech, so they can get started, and, some small percentage of the Copeland and Page, and then, let you take from there, if you want to bring it back to us.
Or perhaps what we could instead recommend, one thing that we did note is obviously that our determinations regarding the impacts are not dispositive regarding the negotiations between the parties. So to the degree that there could be some arguments by the city of Everett that they want to continue to evaluate some impacts that perhaps we didn't evaluate. What we could instead do is, if you wanted to delegate to me or a consortium of staff to determine reasonableness and trying to work between the two parties on what would be necessary going forward, that might be a way to try to resolve this matter, and hopefully the two parties can reach a resolution by and amongst themselves.
What was your original recommendation going to be with regard to a dollar figure?
My original recommendation was going to be probably about approximately 50% of the grant upfront, and then we would work with the parties for the remainder of the grant to determine its reasonableness. That said, that doesn't prejudice the city of Everett that it's only 50% of what's necessary, but since counsel for the city of Everett has put forward that it wanted to be reasonable regarding the number of meetings that would be necessary, it admitted that, say, if there's a much more of a working environment between the two parties, that perhaps 15 meetings would not be necessary. So there's a lot to be determined in that regard.
Well, so what if we went back to that and said 50% of 2 and 3 plus anything over that they can convince you is reasonable and up to the max here, and if you want to bring it back, bring it back.
It could be 50% of 2 and 3, and let them figure out how to spend it around if they want to also, without, we don't have to finalize the line items.
No.
Was there an issue with 3 with regard to a different hourly rate that you were bringing to our attention?
So I just noted that the rate that was being charged of the city for the city of Everett analysis paid for by the Wynn proposal was $375. And the rate, excuse me, I think I said $475 here, but it's $450 included in the scope of work.
But to me, that's the city's problem. I mean, if they want to, we're giving them a number of dollars. If they can negotiate the rate, the hourly rate
Right.
they want to pay.
And if the 30,000 is exceeded, then you can take a look at the rate
If you wanted to.
if you wanted to. And conclude that any excess was reasonable or unreasonable based on the rate differential.
Okay, and with the ability to come back to the commission about
If you
the
wanted.
further
yeah.
disbursements.
That-
John, would you look just, I'm sure this is just a typo, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing something. At the Foley Hoag letter, which is near the front of on the first page of,
Yep.
in that first full paragraph, the last line, it says, "and served on MSN on January 13th, 2013." And then there are two other places where it refers to January 2013. I mean, it's 14, right? Or is there something going on?
Yes.
That's a multiple typo.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm in favor of
I know how they
Commissioner.
feel, though.
Pardon?
I know how they feel.
I'm in favor of Commissioner McHugh's suggestion that we take 50% of the latter two categories without specifying where it goes, that we're authorizing as an initial involuntary disbursement, with some sense that that's appropriate, but delegating to you the ability to take it further if you can get the parties to agree on it, and to bring it to us if you can.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Somebody want to so move?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Guess what? Unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, they're not going anywhere. Yeah, I think it's, well, I think we'll finish up. We've got Region C and definitely Region C, I think. What else do you have, John? You have Region C? Oh, this is it, just.
This
so
and
we've got
then
it,
Region
Saugus,
C. So we have Cambridge and Saugus for the
Cambridge,
Wynn
Saugus,
application.
and then Region C.
Yeah, but as is consistent with our previous reviews of these surrounding community petitions, a lot of the analysis that was done by the consultants carries forward to actually both of these applications because they're in so geographically proximate locations.
Right. So I think we would try to get through everything. Is that all right? Okay, we'll have to take a quick break and we'll be right back. I think we are ready to reconvene. We are reconvening about 3:30. Thank you. And Ombudsman Ziemba will pick up where we left off.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will now consider the surrounding community petitions relative to the Wynn applicant. And first up is a review of the Cambridge surrounding community petition. If you take a look at your Wynn Everett binder, the green tab is Cambridge. If you go to tab 1, page 5, proximity.
Green tab.
Yeah, so Cambridge, we're going first?
Cambridge goes first.
Okay, yeah.
Is that the first? Is that-
This one.
Alphabetical order.
Win.
Yeah, I got
And
that.
it's the first, yeah, first one is
Okay.
Cambridge. Yep. What page again? I'm sorry. I got
Page
confused.
5.
Okay, right at the beginning, yeah.
Of the DIR certificate or of
The
the?
proximity,
No, of the packet.
under number 1.
Tab one. Got it. Got it.
On proximity, Cambridge indicated that it's less than 5 miles away from Everett. The Wynn applicant indicated that the length of the common border is 0. It doesn't border, it doesn't just have a shared border, and that it's 1.14 miles from the site to the border of Cambridge. Almost immediately, the next page, page 8, we begin with transportation infrastructure. And I'm going to turn to Rick and his crew for the analysis.
Okay, we're talking about the city of Cambridge.
City of Cambridge, and his analysis is found on page 53. That's where we begin the transportation analysis.
And if I can direct your attention to the screen and the map, the site, the wind site is shown right here in Everett. If the wind site happens to be in the city of Cambridge there, that was inadvertent and shouldn't be taken as a declaration one way or the other. But the traffic, as it comes out of that front door of the wind site, about 1/3 of it goes towards the north on Broadway, and about 2/3 of it goes to the south towards the river and over the river. Now, some of that traffic, once it goes over the river, turns north again on 93 and comes up north. But in terms of Cambridge, there are 2 roads that they suggested, would have traffic on them. One was Route 16. Remember, we talked about Route 16 in Everett, went across east-west. Then Route 16 crosses 93, about this location, Wellington Square, and follows the Neponset River all the way down to the Airwife Brook train station. So there's a section of Route 16 in Cambridge that carries approximately 5% of the traffic, and this is a wind number. The wind projected that 5% of the traffic would be on Route 16 in the vicinity of 93. Most of that 5%, although some of it will peel off, most of that 5% will follow Airwife Brook Parkway along the river and go out Route 2 towards the west. So there's 2 intersections there of interest. One is the Massachusetts Avenue intersection, which is right about here, and the other one is what we'll call the Rotary at the end of Route 2. Both of those are congested intersections, and looking at the impact of that 5% on those 2 intersections are what we'll talk about in just a minute. But before we get to that, there's another sort of piece of the Cambridge issue, and that's the approximately 37 or a third of the traffic that goes south on 93. Now, the problem is, as we see it, is the traffic analysis just ended right there, and it said that there'd be 37% of the traffic on 93 heading into Boston, following 93 directly south, and as in the other case, also taking the Mass Pike I-90 west. But they didn't do any analysis past just identifying that 37% on 93. And furthermore, they looked at, would go through that intersection. And that struck us as unusual. And the reason for that is they don't define what happens to that 37% as you go further south and west. So we took a look at what might happen to that 37%. And we found that about 60% of that, based on their own data, would take Route I-90, the Mass Pike west. And that's a significant amount of traffic for the entire, it's about 25% of the entire casino's traffic. And then we asked ourselves, if you were at the casino and wanted to get to the Mass Pike going west, how would you do that? And conversely, if you were coming in on the Mass Pike, passing 128, coming in on the Mass Pike, and you were heading towards the casino, how would you get there? And we also know from their own data that the majority of people will be coming from about a 30-minute to 90-minute drive. Those patrons will know the local roads. They'll have an understanding of what options they have. They're not coming from Kansas, so they have an idea of what their options might be. And furthermore, we Googled that question, and if you look at the next slide, you'll see if you're traveling on Route 90 and you ask how to get to the Wynn facility, they give you two options. One is staying on Route 90, coming to 93, and then getting off and going through Andrews Square. The alternative is getting off at the Brighton Austin Toll, going across the river, taking Memorial Drive, through the Land Boulevard. Memorial Drive turns into Land Boulevard, crossing McGrath Highway right about here, and that's a congested intersection, one that they analyzed, and one that, by the way, has a level of service F, and one that they did not project any traffic going through. So if you're coming down the Mass Pike going to the casino, or conversely, if you're at the casino trying to get to the Mass Pike West, you might reasonably take this alternative. In fact, the Google map tells you at certain points of the day it's certainly a shorter ride, and in some cases, it's a quicker ride, depending obviously on the congestion on the Pike, 93, and then along Memorial Drive. We all know that there's some congestion getting across the river, there's some congestion at the intersection, but nevertheless, these are two reasonable options to get there. The traffic engineers did not anticipate that any of this traffic would go on Memorial Drive, which we think is difficult to justify, that some percentage of that traffic would go on Memorial Drive. We estimated that would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10%. So we have two issues now. We have the one issue up here on Route 16, and then we have the issue on Memorial Drive. Both the Route 16 section in Cambridge out here and the Memorial Drive section in Cambridge. So if we go to the next slide and look at some numbers, we can see that Route 16 has about 3,300 vehicles in that section in Cambridge. The casino would put approximately 100 vehicles on that section, and that would be a 3% increase. On Memorial Drive, similar numbers, it's about the same volume, slightly more vehicles, a slightly higher percentage, almost 5%. Now, just for full disclosure, if you look at the Route 16 traffic, those numbers are predicted based on wind data that we took right out of the wind report. We didn't have to do any additional calculations to come up with those numbers. The Memorial Drive numbers, because they neglected to look at Memorial Drive, or that split of that large 37%, we made those splits. So we, acting on the behalf of the Gaming Commission, made those splits and came up with about 8% of the casino traffic on Memorial Drive. Hence, this 5% increase, and hence this impact. So the numbers come from slightly different locations. Now, both roadways, both Route 16 and Memorial Drive, have intersections that are failing. On the Route 16 side, it's the Airwife Brook Route 2 interchange, and to a slightly lesser degree, the Mass Avenue interchange. That operates at a slightly better service and level of service F, but again, there are individual turning movements that are problematic. For example, going north on Mass Avenue, turning left, that movement can back up as almost into Porter Square. So that's that's a level of service F, that one turning movement. On Memorial Drive, you have the issue both at the intersection when you get off the tolls and getting across the river, but more importantly, you have the intersection at Land Boulevard and 28, which is right at the Museum of Science. That intersection operates at level of service F. And as I said before, the traffic analysis assumed there would be no traffic going through that intersection from the casino. We find that to be implausible. And whether it's 8% or 7% or 10%, there will be what we consider a significant amount of traffic taking that option to get to the casino. And because we have degraded intersections both on 16, which is maybe a little closer call, but when you add the issue on 16 with the issue on Memorial Drive, which we would say is a little bit more problematic than the 16 issue. You add them together, and it's our conclusion that there's a significant adverse impact to the roadways in Cambridge.
And one, sorry, go ahead.
How do you account, Mr. Moore, for the fact that neither DOT nor the Planning Council mentioned either of those roads?
Yeah, well, you found that in several of the other cases as well. The Highway Department is looking primarily at the main arterial roads. They do, as you get farther away from the point of the project, get less interested, and they're trying to focus on, specific locations that are close to the project that have, very, direct impact. But we, we judge here that one of the intersections was included. It was the Land Boulevard 28. That was included in the analysis. It's our judgment that it wasn't included properly in terms of the amount of traffic coming from the casino. Agreed that the Route 16 issue is more of a stretch, and if that was the only issue that we were talking about in Cambridge, it would be a very close call and could go either way. But we think because of that Land Boulevard, which is included in the analysis, and you add them together, it tips it in the favor of a determination.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moore, you mentioned familiarity with the roadways and some of the difficulties. This is purely anecdotal, but I am familiar with Memorial Drive. I avoid it at all costs. Just on the pedestrians, the difficulty in going through a green light and pedestrians not obeying their do not walk sign on the Harvard, around Harvard Square.
It's Cambridge.
Right. Is that something, as the crow flies, or as Google tells us, that may be, a direct route, but there's something about, those kinds of headaches, also as evidenced by the fact that some of those intersections are already failing at a level of service that you say, that may yield at least some drivers to avoid that altogether. How does that factor into your analysis?
I think you're dead on, and the traffic engineers made that same point, that if you're on the interstate, you have no interference with pedestrians or bikes or traffic lights. That is the judgment you make in taking the alternative. I used to also commute that route, and every time I came to the Alston Brighton toll, I made a judgment as to whether to get off on either Memorial Drive or Starro Drive,
right,
or staying on the Turnpike. And I didn't have to negotiate the leg of 93 that goes from the end of the Turnpike up to Sullivan Square. That's probably the most problematic, segment, particularly in the 5 o'clock hour. And if that is congested, and if that backs up onto the Mass Pike, or if the Copley Square off-ramp backs onto the Mass Pike, and the Mass Pike through the middle of downtown and 93 are congested, it's clear to me that Memorial Drive or even Starro Drive are preferable alternatives. And I think the point is we could argue the exact percentages, given the level of analysis we did, but to say that it's a zero is not, it's not plausible in our opinion.
How did the other consultants come down? We had the same trifecta, right? You had 3 groups looking at this,
Yeah.
and where did the others come down?
They came down clearly. I mean, there was a very, very strong opinion that Memorial Drive is a credible alternative here.
I mean, and 16, but they both came down, I think, recommending that Cambridge should be a surrounding community for purposes of traffic. at those two sites, right?
Yes.
There was no difference of opinion amongst the consultants?
No, but there was a good deal more discussion, as I said, on the Route 16.
That was more marginal, right?
That was a marginal call, but clearly the Memorial Drive is what made it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for the record, there was no impact on water or sewer or construction vehicles.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I think we can move to operation. If you take a look at page 86 in your packets. The city of Cambridge is concerned that because of Cambridge's proximity to Everett, additional impacts in social services and public safety in the community are expected. Cambridge is also concerned about the impact on Cambridge's smaller and mid-sized entertainment venues by the additional competition from subsidized casino entertainment. And so with that, I'll ask Lyle to give us the benefit of his analysis. Some of the analysis, obviously, that he did for the prior applicant carries forward in this, but I'll ask him to give specific concerns relative to this applicant, and then to the extent that those discussions carry forward to the next applicant, excuse me, the next petitioner, Saugus, we can just take advantage of the efficiencies there.
Sure, thanks, John. Just a quick reminder, the three things that we're looking at on an overall basis was the lack of demand substitution, the repatriation of gaming dollars, and the positive impacts, and consider those in Cambridge as well as the other locations. Also worthwhile, just a quick recap on the Wynn proposal, which is somewhat different than the Mohegan Sun proposal. Gaming floor about 170,000 square feet, quite similar, although more slot machines in Wynn than in Mohegan Sun. One 500-room hotel, so the same number of rooms, but only one property. 8 food and beverage outlets with 1,000 seats, somewhat less food and beverage activity than Mohegan Sun. 1,000-seat multi-purpose space, a large sports bar, an outdoor amphitheater, and about 90,000 square feet of retail space. So similar, but some differences that are reflected in the operating parameters of those two gaming companies. John mentioned this, but just let me hit on it again. The city of Cambridge's claim in its statement regarding impact is, and I'll quote, "Negative impacts on Cambridge's smaller and mid-sized entertainment venues by the additional competition from subsidized casino entertainment," unquote. Cambridge doesn't specify any specific venue or quantify the impacts in any way. And it's also worth knowing that there were no ILEV petitions from Cambridge, so from the point of view of the operators of those facilities, there appeared to be no impact. Wynn submitted a range of background documents that talk to some of the positive impacts from operation. Broadly speaking, these are similar to what I reviewed for Everett. Worthwhile mentioning a couple of points. Employment in the same order of magnitude, although several hundred more employees in Wynn than in Mohegan Sun, just over 3,000. Purchases of goods and services in the same range, about $100 million, with a commitment to spend between 40 and 50 in the immediate area. And an estimate of about 3.5 million visits from those living between 60 and 200 miles from the casino, in addition to tourists already coming to Boston and those tourists that are incented to visit the Wynn facility by Wynn's own sales and marketing activities. As a result, and again, just in a quick summary, we don't see any negative impacts with respect to the Category 1 on Cambridge, and Cambridge did not identify what those were beyond a broad sweeping statement, so we would conclude that there is no negative and potentially several positive impacts as a result of the Category 1 licensee. John?
Thank you, Lyle. Thank you. Any questions, Commissioners? Lynn, if you can give us your presentation.
Sure. So Cambridge did not mention housing or schools or infrastructure as an impact in their petition. I went over the regional overview, and we pretty much studied the same areas. This particular, the Wynn is proposing 3,287 permanent jobs on site, of which 20% were supervisory. They really didn't speak to where they were going to draw their employees from. The other difference is that they're offering to provide a shuttle service to a transportation hub in Malden versus using the Blue Line. And that will also get you pretty much access to most of the MBTA lines in Greater Boston. We looked at demographics in 7 communities this time. And we also note that Cambridge does not physically abut Everett. It is to the south and the west, and it is also separated by Route 16 and 93. So our research on unemployment showed 28,000 unemployed people as of December 2013, plus an additional 2,400 in Cambridge, approximately 9 times more unemployed persons in our small study area than the number of employees that are proposed. On the housing and vacancy, there's approximately 30,000 vacant housing units in the 7-town study area, plus another 3,000 in Cambridge, and that's also nearly 10 times more vacant housing units than jobs to be filled. And as mentioned previously, the 30,000 units in the Greater Boston pipeline. Our findings were that Cambridge will not be significantly and adversely affected by the operation of a Category 1 gaming establishment after its opening due to housing or housing impacts resulting from the facility. And given the high unemployment and housing vacancy rates in the area, it is more likely than not that the Category 1 casino will be beneficial to the housing markets in Cambridge and therefore add to the real estate tax base as well as increase overall consumer spending in the area.
Thank you.
Mark?
Sure. So in the City of Cambridge petition to be designated as a surrounding community by WIN, they cited generally that there would be, quote, additional impacts on social service and public safety that could accompany a casino in close proximity to their residents. Cambridge did not specify or quantify the specific services or resources that would be impacted. They employed the services of RKG Associates to help evaluate those general issues. They did not provide any specifics other than to say that the resort casino will utilize its state-of-the-art construction, in-house security systems, along with a large security team to offset some portion of the additional municipal services. And that would also carry out into the neighboring communities. The research and evidence that I presented to you in the previous petition would apply to this as well. So I really don't have any additional evidence to present to you or support or not support the petition of Cambridge.
Great. Thank you, Mark. There were no other impacts. We can move to positive impacts. Cambridge asserted no positive impacts. The WIN applicant noted significant positive impacts upon the community, many of which you've heard. And they did try to do an estimate of specific earnings for each of the different communities. But in general, they referenced the significant numbers of new jobs and revenues and spending within the region. But as you just heard. With that, Commission, I ask that you deliberate.
Anybody?
I think similar to the previous presentation we had, we have clearly identified, even though it probably hasn't been studied as thoroughly as Route 16 was in the previous deliberation, but it certainly sounds like from our experts that there's going to be some impact on Memorial Drive as it cuts through Cambridge, of people trying to get around the Mass Turnpike to 93 connection. But I think everything else is can't be substantiated, or certainly there isn't enough evidence or data to have our consultants suggest that there would be an impact either on business or housing or the other factors. So I'm not opposed to making them a surrounding community designation just based on traffic, and maybe even be able to limit it to where we see a problem on Memorial Drive through the neck of the woods by the Science Museum.
I have a general question that applies more and more to some of these topics that are, that include some level of assumptions by necessity. And that is the Gaming Act does provide for the Community Mitigation Fund and gives us the authority to look at, we're as the trustees of those funds, to entertain and receive requests in the future for addressing some of these problems, if you will, some mitigation needs. I'm just throwing it out there as, is this something we need to contemplate more and more as some of these issues continue to be compounded just by the complexity of the roadways, some of the roadways being, the complexity of many factors, some of those roadways already operating at levels of service inefficiency, and the number of surrounding communities. But it's really...
Yeah, well, I was having some of the same thought. I mean, as the negative effects get more and more marginal, but marginal, there is the offset. I mean, we do have the capacity to offset, and the positives are non-trivial in terms of employment and supplier purchases and the impact of wages and salaries and repatriated dollars, the whole bit. And at some point, you might get to the point where, albeit a negative impact, it is modest enough. In this case, we're really talking about for sure that one segment. And, it seems to me it's close to saying, yes, there is a negative, but there is a community mitigation fund if it really becomes a problem, and there is all the positive impacts. It starts to work its way towards an offset. It's kind of a fine line, but the Route 16, you could have made the same case about Route 16, but that goes right through the heart of a city, and it seems to me that was a little more serious. But I'm mixed on the issue.
Well, I think that I've always understood, and our prior discussions haven't really come to grips in terms of a firm policy with the notion, but I've always thought of the Community Mitigation Fund as designed to deal with the unanticipated consequences of what these casinos produce, and that to the extent one could anticipate consequences, they ought to be dealt with up front. I agree with the theory that at some point they become too attenuated. They become more attenuated, but if we can identify them and identify them as worth mitigating, before they start, it seems to me we should do that. And it seems to me that 4.7% increase in that area, the Land Boulevard, McClellan Highway intersection.
McGrath.
Pardon me?
It's McGrath Highway.
McGrath Highway, yeah, I'm sorry. That doesn't take much to make that even more unpalatable, horribly more unpalatable.
Well, it's already a mess.
It's a mess.
It's a total mess.
And so putting a layer of traffic on top of that, it seems to me is something we can foresee the need to do, and we ought to deal with it now.
Mr. Moore,
They ought to deal with it, I'm sorry.
no. Mr. Moore, we didn't ask you the specific mitigation measures. Would you be talking about signal changes as well as maybe lane improvements or, left-hand turn improvements as you did when you explained the Route 16 issue? Similar here, or?
Yes, I think given the level of impact, the most cost-effective would be to look at a modification of the signal timing, maybe some restriping. You'd have to look at the intersection in a lot more detail. There's many, many lanes coming in from many different directions, so.
If there were any easy fixes there,
No.
you'd think they would have been done by now.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I'm
right.
seeing Mr. Tramatozzi nodding his head. I mean, those two places have been a nightmare for, a very long time. And that's one thing that concerns me is that, I think that's a very good question. You were quick about the issues on Route 16, that because of the width of the median strip and so forth, there are some possibilities, but fixing the exit onto Star Wars Memorial, at Alston, and the Science Museum Bridge, I mean.
I guess that was a little bit part of my point. What could reasonably be expected of the applicant and each one of these cities to negotiate for mitigation?
It seems to, I'm no traffic person, but it seems to me you can't really consider this all of, in isolated chunks. It seems to me theoretically, and I throw this out, that if you could fix the Sullivan Square area so that you had a better place to dump that traffic that came across, you'd open up more things that signaling could do for you. You could have a longer flow across there or something. But now I feel like I'm buying into Frank's admonition. Everybody drives a car, thinks he's a traffic engineer.
That I believe, Commissioner, is a bit of a stretch. A
Just
good
like
try.
We can all manage the Red Sox.
Yeah.
We're all architects because we
I
live in
mean,
houses.
the law does suggest the possibility of a trade-off, and we haven't ever really used that clause, but it does suggest net negative. Do you have any sense? I mean, you looked at the overall picture, you've talked about the positive benefits, you're the ones who made the judgments about the traffic problems, How do you see it on a net basis? Lynn, your face was getting all wound up when I was talking, so any of you?
My reaction is the numbers that they're talking about in terms of benefits had a lot of zeros after them, and they were impressive. In terms of jobs and economic benefit.
So you're suggesting there would be a net positive? Is that what I'm hearing?
I could be, yes, I think that's a useful discussion to have. I mean, you can't trade a job for a better traffic, but it's not an unreasonable discussion to have.
In this particular case, and Frank, you could really speak to this, but in this particular case, and I could be completely wrong about this, but it does feel to me like biting off that segment of Memorial Drive from the land intersection to the exit from the turnpike. That seems to me like you're biting off a very big bite, and it's a problem which is already very severe. Yes, this might make it somewhat worse. Is that right or wrong? If we put this on the table as something that might need to get accommodated within a surrounding community agreement, are we being realistic here?
Mr. Chairman, I think you're correct. The problem that exists there in front of the Museum of Science has been there for years. It has been looked at, I'm sure, by many different firms. The DCR owns that intersection. Their priority is pedestrian first and vehicles second. It's possible that with new technology, that being camera detection versus loop detection in the roadway, and some optimization, they may be able to improve it somewhat. It'll probably still be at a level of service F, but you may be able to reduce the delays somewhat. So it's a big challenge. I don't think that it'll be solved very easily, if at all. And that intersection will remain a challenge. So some people will try to avoid it. On the other side, Commissioner McHugh mentioned Sullivan Square. Some of you may remember there was an overpass. You have the underpass there now for Route 99, and there used to be an overpass, so you could avoid the rotary at Sullivan Square. That was taken down probably 20 years ago because it was beyond economical repair. So that was removed, and then the congestion at Sullivan Square became worse. There are some long-range plans for Sullivan Square and Rutherford Avenue, but those plans are not to widen, they're actually to reduce roadway width and do more landscaping in that, along Rutherford Avenue corridor and in Boston in particular. But there are things I think that can be done at Sullivan Square to try and improve what the traffic operation is out there.
What about the Brighton Alston exit off the Pike?
Similarly, that there had been some improvements that have been done over the years. It should be looked at again. I'm not suggesting that the applicant, either one of them, would be able to solve the problem, but it does deserve another look. I don't think it's been looked at for quite some time, probably not since the Coke plant was closed down. So it's been a long time since that intersection was looked at.
Just as a point, the problem on that end of the link is in Boston. It's not in Cambridge. It's on the Boston side of the river. So if you're strictly looking at Cambridge, by the time you get to Cambridge, you're done. I mean, you're on your way.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, so there would be a little bit of a bottleneck on the Boston side trying to get into the Cambridge side.
That is a problem.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant.
Well, you have a problem, I mean, the net effect of this is that you have dealt with this before, an incremental impact on an already level of service F intersection. And it's not reasonable, one would think, to put the cost of fixing the level F intersection on the applicant. What is reasonable is to mitigate the effect of the additional incremental impact. And you wonder if you're just talking about metaphysics when you start talking that way. How are you going to figure out a neutral impact, an incremental change that will make the addition of this small amount, but significant amount of traffic, neutral insofar as the level of service is concerned? And that's a hard thing to get your head around, isn't it?
Yeah, because to get the incremental improvement may be a very, very large dollar amount.
Right, right.
However, we are in Cambridge. The technology that Frank was talking about, what better place to look at,
Right.
The future
Right
of
next to
of
MIT.
traffic. Yeah.
Right.
Ed Land would appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right.
And, well, is there, are there other things that the applicant could come up with? For example, I know I became very aware of free play and as a result of all these analyses. Are there ways to incentivize patrons to come at different times in the day, for example? Come to cash in your free play if it's after 8 o'clock Friday nights, not before. Have you seen instances of that, Lyle, as we sit here?
I think that's distinctly possible, certainly whether you're programming entertainment or programming different marketing promotions on different days or times of the week. The reality is, in most major urban centers, which rush hour happens at certain times in the morning and certain times in the afternoon. You simply can't change that. So I think what we've looked at this in other jurisdictions before, where, and I do own a car, but I'm not a traffic engineer, where the impact simply, people will learn how to drive to where they need to get to. And if, as Mr. Moore was saying, if Memorial Drive becomes a problem, you're going to put the traffic back on the interstate. And if it takes somebody 15 minutes longer to get where they're going, thinking of a casino customer, then that's what it's going to take. They're not going to put themselves on a route that's going to take them longer simply because the intersection is there or not there. So I think there's probably very limited ability you're going to have to change behavior through those prime congestion periods of the day.
And that was the point I was going to make. I mean, I do spend a lot of time on the turnpike, so I do consider myself a traffic engineer. The fact that if I'm living to those areas kind of to the south and west of Everett, and I pull up my Google map and it sends me through Cambridge, and I realize, that I'd rather be sitting there somewhere else poking my eyes out with a needle. I will find another route. I mean, is there an expectation that what can be a problem, and you've identified it as, as having an impact? But does your experience tell you that over time that sometimes that volume of a problem drops if it becomes such an inconvenience or such a headache to get through a suggested route?
Well, I think you're seeing great strides in giving information to drivers to make that right decision. And I think as time goes by, certainly over the next 5 or 10 years, you'll see that whatever the real-time condition is on those roads will be available to drivers to make that decision. And it'll be day by day as to which, route is better.
I know we're a long way from thinking about policy, to Commissioner Zuniga's point around the Community Mitigation Fund, but I kind of find myself swayed to think about this and throwing something out there because we love deliberating in public. Making a ruling of not a designated surrounding community, but obviously reflecting the commission's interest, and obviously that this is a particular area of interest, and this may guide our future Community Mitigation Fund decisions and action, but there's so many other moving pieces. There's so many other moving pieces from other agencies, reflecting long-term transportation plans of their own, that kind of backing away from kind of making this singular decision, thinking that we're going to be the end-all, be-all to the problems that already exist, as Commissioner McHugh mentioned.
Well, so let's resolve this. I think it sounds like we've got two possibilities. One is to say it's not a surrounding community because the damage isn't big enough and the positive benefits are pretty substantial, and the likelihood of fixing particularly the land boulevard with small money isn't great. Or calling it a surrounding community, but directing the arbitrator, in effect, making it as narrow and modest a review process as possible. Just basically saying, take a quick look and see if there's any modest, reasonable way to do it. Those are the two options I see us talking about.
Or even before the arbitrator, hopefully the parties. We shouldn't presume.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. I'm with you. I mean, I don't like the idea of pre-committing the community mitigation. I've said not only unanticipated, but unanticipatable, both. And I want to have us already have committed big chunks of that. So I'm with you. So I think I kind of lean towards trying to direct the parties to hear what we're saying and be narrow and realistic and realize that it's a non-trivial issue, but to be reasonable in trying to approach it.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say that I think it is important to note that we're not asking any applicants to fix pre-existing problems. We're trying to address anything that is caused over and above those. But how you address a problem can be subject to a lot of creativity and flexibility. For example, I think the city of Cambridge has indicated that it is very interested in different mode share of how do you get people off of the roads? How much attention does any of these applicants make to public transit services, improving their outreach to make sure that their employees get on buses, et cetera, et cetera. So potentially there's some flexibility on the parties.
We'd send the wind catamaran up the river, and pick them up at Brighton, maybe. BU Boathouse. Okay, so,
The imagination of, you know, I mean, I'm not buying into that idea necessarily, but the imaginative use of traffic reduction through other modes, or
yeah.
figuring out how to make it more attractive for people to come in on the red line and change to the orange line to go over there, and those kinds of things is really interesting.
Well, running buses is another
Right,
thing that casinos
right,
often use to bring, well, it could be a drop-off and a pickup. I know it's not easy conceivably, but
Right.
Okay. Somebody want to,
I move that,
something.
with respect to the intersection at Land Boulevard and the McGrath and O'Brien Highway, Cambridge be designated as surrounding community.
okay, and the context they'll see in the
Right.
transcript.
That because of,
Yeah.
let me rephrase that. That because of the impact of traffic on the intersection of Land Boulevard and the McGrath and O'Brien Highway, the city of Cambridge be designated as surrounding community.
Second?
Second.
Any other discussion? You guys all right? All in favor of the motion to make Cambridge a designated community as described, surrounding community as described? Aye?
Aye.
aye.
Opposed? You abstaining?
No, I said aye.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
I didn't say it
All
loudly.
right. All right, so the ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to Saugus, proximity, page 5. Saugus states that it sits in proximity to Everett. The distance from the closest point on Route 1 at Saugus to the proposed casino site is about
John,
4.5.
where are you? Where is page 5 of what?
Page 5 of the Saugus petition.
Number 1?
Oh, that's the first petition.
Tab 1.
That's the first petition, so got it, okay. Yep. Got it.
Saugus' closest border is approximately 1.9 miles from the host community, Everett, measured from border to border on Route 1. And then with that, I'll ask Mr. Moore to give us the benefit of the traffic analysis.
Okay, we'll start with the same map. The wind site is in the middle. We just spoke about two-thirds of the traffic that was basically exiting to the south. Now we have a third of the traffic exiting to the north. And of that third of the traffic, about 2% go up to Route 16, continue on through the circle and up Route 99. Another 9% get on Route 16 in the east direction, hit Route 1, and then go up to Route 1. So we have 9% north-south on Route 1, 2% on 99. Right about at the top of the map here, those two roads come together right about the border of Saugus, which is, as John said, is about 4.5 miles north of the site. And then the combined 11% are on Route 1. And if you just look over to this map, it's a little small, but this is 128. This is the section of Route 1 in Saugus. It's, again, about 4.5 miles. 99 and Route 1 join right about here, and that 9%, that 11% run along that section of Route 1, which is a divided highway, 3 lanes in each direction in Saugus. There are 4 interchanges. There are no signalized interchanges along that length of Route 1. However, certain of the off-ramps are signalized at the top of the off-ramp where they have a turning movement onto the crossroads. One important feature about Route 1 there is all of the curb cuts in all of the retail facilities on both sides. And basically, that takes the right-hand lane or the slow lane and prevents it from being a free-flowing lane. Because of all the conflicts, you can't get the kind of traffic volume through that third lane that you would in a normal limited access interstate highway. And coming in the southbound direction, it's further complicated because when you get, if you're driving south and right as you get out of Saugus, the 3 lanes next down to 2 lanes. So effectively, you have 2-lane capacity south of Saugus, and that generally causes a backup or can potentially cause a backup in the southbound direction. Now, if we look at the next slide, the capacity of Route 1, I'm sorry, the volume on Route 1 today is about 10,000 vehicles in the peak hour. That's the Friday afternoon peak hour. And that's about 60% going northbound and about 40% going southbound. So that would be about the equivalent of 6,000 vehicles going northbound. If you had a limited access interstate highway, the numbers would suggest you were at capacity. However, because of those curb cuts on the right-hand lane, and you don't have full capacity on the right-hand lane, it's our judgment that the roadway in the Friday peak is at, or in many cases, over capacity. And that's why you see the congestion on Route 1 if you've ever driven it on the PM peak, particularly on Friday. Going southbound, you have about 4,000 vehicles, so it's less. So you would say it has some available capacity, except for the fact that those 3 lanes neck down to those 2, and that puts effectively the 3 lanes going southbound. The one inside lane is compromised already, and then you're necking down into 2 lanes. So it's our judgment that Route 1 in that section of Saugus is at or over capacity today without any additional traffic. Now, Mass DOT did not make any comments, nor did MAPC about that section of Route 1. And it wasn't studied in the traffic analysis. But again, it's our contention, just like we were talking about the Land Boulevard intersection, that the roadway is already congested and in many cases, many occasions, over capacity. Part of that, as the second bullet mentions, is because of that driveway. And in some cases, those signals on the ramps cause backup onto the main line, which further congests the free flow of traffic. So again, because we're starting with a congested, in our judgment, overcapacity highway, and we're adding 185 vehicles in that hour to the roadway, although it looks like a modest 2% increase, because we're starting with that overcapacity issue, we consider that's a significant impact.
So you are adding the 9% and the 2%.
Correct.
But doesn't that assume that, so you're assuming 11% comes from north of that split?
That's correct.
Why would I get off on 99 if I'm driving through Route 1?
If you're driving south
Yes.
and you go into the casino,
Yep.
well, it's a congested route because of signals. But again, it's just a preferential judgment. The traffic engineers for WIN suggested they made that split based on travel times, based on gravity models, based on their analysis. So we would generally conclude with that, whether it's 1% or 2%, depending on what day it is and what's happening on Route 1 versus 99. But clearly, if you were coming down Route 1, your preference would be to stay on Route 1. And of that 11%, 9% of the people, or almost 90% of the people are staying on Route 1, and 10 to 20% are going on 99.
What about people who live in the vicinity, say, of Melrose and Malden, or, you know?
I want
And
to go back to,
Um,
yeah.
So that 11% assumes
Not going to go the whole way.
that people are going further from that split.
Yeah, I believe it's hard to read, but I think that's Malden.
Yep.
And you can see these arrows
Okay.
are the local traffic that, I think that, that's actually 2%, and that's 1%. So basically, the traffic engineers judge that local traffic will go to some of those local communities in that particular, level of, percentage level.
How does Mohegan Sun deal with Route 1?
Say again?
How does Mohegan Sun deal with Route 1? Must be pretty much the same projected traffic.
It's about 18%, and I believe Saugus is a surrounding community to Mohegan Sun. This case, we're talking about 11% of the traffic from Wynn. Mohegan Sun estimates about, I believe it's about 18% of the traffic will go to Route 1. So it's a bigger impact from Mohegan Sun.
I don't quite see why that would be. But John, is Saugus a surrounding community for Mohegan Sun?
Yes. Yes, and I don't know what they're negotiating, but,
Right.
so it's 19 versus 11,
Right.
and considering both generate about the same amount of traffic, it's the same amount of vehicles, proportionally.
19 versus 11, but the relevant number is the 2% peak hour increase, right?
I'm sorry?
The relevant number is the 2% peak hour increase.
That's right. And the 18% would be presumably about a 3 or 4% increase.
Right.
And I think you can see that number if you can read the chart on the
Right.
first page. when
Right,
we-
right.
Okay, I guess we're done with traffic infrastructure. Nothing else on infrastructure.
Just the standard two statements that there are no water and sewer impacts and there are no significant construction vehicle impacts.
Right. Next.
Great.
Is that Lynn?
Yep, so so now we turn to operations. And there was no significant housing concern that was put forward by the town of Saugus. So I'm going to ask Lyle and Mark to address their concerns regarding public safety and economic development concerns. Saugus raised significant questions regarding the impact on businesses along that stretch because they depend significantly on that for their tax revenue base.
Okay, yes, the basis for Saugus's petition is effectively their concern over a lost meals tax from restaurants located along Route 1. And the thinking there is that the traditional patrons of those restaurants will be going to the casino and spending dollars there instead. Again, we've dealt with that before on the concept of the demand substitution on dollars spent one place or the other. The Saugus restaurants generate about $1 million in meals tax annually, which represents about 1.25% of the town's budget, so it's not an insignificant number. The town did provide some more background than some of the other communities have in terms of standing behind these numbers. They produced what I could best call an informal survey of 5 restaurants where the economic development coordinator spoke to those restaurateurs about their concerns on future lost business. And perhaps not surprisingly, and perhaps I don't know how the questions were framed, there was concern on the part of those restaurateurs that there would be a potential loss. We frankly put relatively limited weight on that survey given the size of the sample and the qualitative nature. The town also provided a study, roughly 10 years old, that was done looking at the impact of a casino on restaurants in particular. The study was done in a more, what I'll call rural context, not in a large urban center, so again, we discounted that as not being particularly relevant to the Saugus and Greater Boston situation. The town also claimed, and we didn't take this into account, but the town also claimed that it was not well positioned to benefit from visitation to the casino, as its current zoning prohibited mixed-use projects, so projects that could include a hotel or other benefits, which I thought is somewhat contradictory, because in one hand, they're suggesting that they were going to lose business to the casino, but on the other hand, not being able to take advantage of it because their own zoning bylaws prohibited the ability to construct those commercial activities that might be able to benefit. As a result, and again, similar to what we found in Cambridge, Wynn's background documents spoke to significant employment, some 3,000 FTEs, significant purchases of goods and services, and about 3.5 million visitors coming through that corridor. Again, we believe that Saugus's concerns are not founded. In fact, just in what Mr. Moore was saying in terms of the increased visitation and traffic through that road, if anything, that you're putting more people in front of those places of business and likely would siphon off additional capacity. Just as an overall comment, I was just thinking of it as we were talking about on this last issue. We talk about repatriation of gaming to Massachusetts. To the extent anybody, Saugus and north, including up into New Hampshire, are going south to Connecticut and Rhode Island to gamble, if those trips are now being captured by a casino in the Greater Boston area, there are trips that already exist that are coming off that road and now going to a local casino. So there's a certain extent of traffic that's gaming related now that's going to be just diverted to a location that's much closer. But let me close with we don't feel that there is any substantive, really any potential negative impact from loss of in this case meals tax to Saugus.
Thank you, Lyle. And, Mark?
Yes. So in the town of Saugus petition, they cited a couple social impacts that they felt would accompany a casino located in Everett. The town of Saugus shares in public safety resources with the host community Everett in the event that Everett faces increased demand for its own emergency and police services resulting in a casino, such as those through road crashes in connection with alcohol use. These mutual aid calls would necessarily increase due to an accompanying spillover effect. The second impact that they cited would be that social costs accompanying a casino being in close proximity to the community. This could take place through Saugus's own residents confronting gambling addiction personally due to the close proximity of the casino. In response, again, Wynn used the RKG and Associates. Their response was that the casino resort will utilize its state-of-the-art construction, in-house security systems, along with a large security team to offset some portion of the additional municipal services. This would also carry over to the neighboring communities. I've shared with you previously the evidence regarding road crashes in proximity to a casino. I've also shared with you the evidence regarding gambling disorders and problem gambling in close proximity to a casino. I think that there is some evidence that would suggest that both of those concerns are true. The extent to which are not known, and there's again many variables that are at play that would potentially impact the actual effect of a casino being located in Everett. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Saugus did raise an other issue under 5, but Lyle mentioned that in his analysis regarding the zoning question. So I'll turn to the positive impacts. And I think we've had a fairly good recitation of the positive impacts. Again, the Wynn team did estimate potential earnings for each of the applicant cities, and that's included in your packet, but overall, a significant number of jobs and revenues for the area.
Okay. Who wants to hazard an opinion?
It would appear, I mean, we had a very similar discussion just a few minutes ago relative to Cambridge. I think the issues are relative to traffic, apparently, or as per the opinion of our consultants. They address levels of service that are already close to or at failing. So it gets complicated in terms of how much is added to a failing or a set of failing intersections. But it would appear that when it comes to traffic, it's something that we need to look at.
It's, well, I was just going to say, I mean, it just, again, we're starting to parse down to really minor, here you're talking about something like 100 or 120 cars out of 6,000 on top of 6,000 during Friday night, the single worst time of the week. So meaning it's somewhat less than that any other time of the week, basically. So if we're going to call it a surrounding community because of that, again, I think we should be very clear that we're talking about a minimal situation.
2%.
Yeah.
I'm at the point of uncomfortable.
Diminishing returns.
Right. 4.7, I mean, there are no bright lines here.
No.
And 2% at a peak time and less than 2% at all other times. That's basically what the presentation
Well, it might be
is.
the same 2%, but it's 2% of a much lower number, so it doesn't create the problem. It might still be 2%, but it's 2% of 4,000 or 3,000, not 2% of 6,000.
Yeah, but in terms of overall impact, right?
Yeah.
It's 2% of capacity. It's 2% over, 2% added to an overcapacity traffic at one point during the week.
Right.
Yeah. And going back to the word significant adverse, both imprecision, significant is a hugely imprecise meaning, but we're getting to the point where I think we're stretching all the meaning out of it.
And putting the applicant in a really tough position.
Well, and in addition to just the standard jobs in the region, we also have a consultant analysis that says rather than decrease, be a problem for those restaurants, they actually see an increase, that they will do better because of this. So it's an additional positive here that we did not consider with the last one that I think is important.
The motels, I would think, too.
So that's another factor to weigh, other than jobs to the region, which is standard for all of these communities.
Mr. Chairman, one point that Frank made is that I made a point that going the southbound direction, the 3 lanes neck down to 2, there is a plan well advanced to improve that and add a 3rd lane to Route 1 southbound, which would, to some degree, largely take away the issue southbound.
Which is going to happen regardless of what we do here. Which is going to happen regardless of what we do here today.
Yeah, it was being proposed by a developer to actually straighten out a curved section also. It's actually on hold, and, I mean, I don't see any proponent of a casino ever solving that problem completely, but perhaps one piece of mitigation, if you will, might be to participate in a design that might help solve that problem in the future. Participation could be a small participation or a large participation, but not necessarily solving the problem completely.
I'm
Now, one of the issues that kept coming up was the whole interchange, the exit at 1 and 99, I believe, and that exit is already under plans through MassDOT to be refurbished or renovated in 2016, if I read it correctly.
I'm not sure it's that soon, but yes, you're correct.
What is, I didn't hear what you said. Which
There,
section?
I think it's the exit where 99 and 1 separate.
Okay.
Has always been a site of accidents and
Weaving and-
fatality.
Yeah.
But, MassDOT already has it kind of on their project board to spend money on it.
And this might be an ideal place for the Community Mitigation Fund if you got to that point and some extra dollars were needed in order to complete it. That might be the place
Or to do the design, as Frank said.
to put in some money and some help to make that a reality, rather than
Right.
imposing the burden of trying to figure out how to neutralize the impact from the get-go.
I'm comfortable with Commissioner McHugh's position.
Same here. I was actually uncomfortable back with Cambridge, but
All right.
All right. So I move, well, further? I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
Thinking about this and obviously hoping that there's a spirit of cooperation between the communities and an applicant who may or may not be an eventual licensee, but it might be interesting to have this be a topic of conversation if we do award a license, that somehow cooperation or urging cooperation becomes a condition of their license. We're trying to think of how to keep the parties involved at the table, but not look to our licensee as the end-all be-all to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd move that the committee deny the petition of Saugus to be designated as a surrounding community.
Second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. All right, folks, we have a decision to make.
So Commissioners, if you turn to your regular packets for your March 20th, not your surrounding community packets.
Thank you. Thank you to the consultants.
Yeah,
That was
thank
very,
you so
very
much.
helpful. Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
very helpful.
In item 8C, there was a involuntary disbursements petition from the town of Saugus.
Move to deny.
So I guess the one point of consideration is, number one, in our prior meeting on this matter, there's a reasonable likelihood that the community will be designated as a surrounding community pursuant to 205 CMR 12501.
Which is, we can't meet that standard, so this is open and shut, right?
No, you look at it, as of the time the petition was filed. I mean, because these are costs incurred in preparing the petition. I mean, you can have a reasonable likelihood of something that doesn't happen,
Oh, so
even though you know it's not going to happen.
this is ex post facto.
Right.
how much of these costs have already been spent?
This is a petition for a grant, but it's obvious that that some, at least legal work, has been incurred in the compilation of the petition for surrounding community.
So is it fair to say that you don't know the exact answer to that question?
Yes,
Okay.
that's fair.
I would like to hold this petition till we find out what's been spent. And unless the commission's of the view that, that even if it all has, there's just no way that they can meet the standard.
Have we approved any other involuntary disbursements for a community that we found or did not designate?
Well, today was our first involuntary disbursement.
So no is the answer.
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not answering very straightforward.
Well, it's 5 o'clock.
Cut to the chase.
Yeah.
I think we should try to determine what has been spent, what was spent as of today, relative from this petition. Because whatever has not been spent should be eliminated from the petition since our recent decision 5 minutes ago.
Right.
But what was spent should be entertained. Relative to your point, Commissioner, they had a reasonable assumption.
Well, maybe they did.
They
I
may
mean,
have.
I'd like to have that discussion.
That's right.
We may conclude that they didn't, but
They may have had a reasonable
Yeah, I don't
assumption.
recall them having, when they came before us to talk about their petition, they did not have consultants, and they did not come in with any analysis. They had the one survey, which was, we had a person stop into a couple restaurants and said, oh, yeah, we think we'll be affected. So that's all I recall at all. They did not have any facts or information research they had done.
Well, Mr. Moore talked about, they had pulled up some old surveys
Right.
and stuff.
Right.
There was no original research. Did they present any original research?
I'm sorry?
Did Saugus present any original consulting work on the issues of whether they should be a surrounding community or not? Yeah.
So I can get back to the commission with what has been expended to date.
Okay,
As of today.
as a, yeah.
okay.
So we postpone this petition.
So you will postpone the final resolution of this until we
Right.
get the answer, okay? All right, so we have one item left, and it's a 4:05, and we have a master licensing schedule for Region C,
Great.
which is a non-trivial item.
So on this matter, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that we intended to discuss and decide on any of the issues that were raised. But the intent of my presentation today was to just give you the flavor of the issues that have been put forward and to get direction on how we should proceed in analyzing these to the degree that the commission wants to analyze these. We received a total of four comments as of this morning. One from the City of New Bedford, one from KG Urban Enterprises. City of New Bedford is from their council, Koppelman and Page. And then we received a comment from the Fall River Economic Development Office. The New Bedford letters urged the commission for various reasons to extend the deadline by which applicants have to submit their RFA2 application, and by way of background, that is the July 23rd deadline. Additionally, we received another letter from Donnelly Clark on behalf of Mass Gaming and Entertainment. They also requested an extension of the deadline to December 31st, 2014. But they also put forward a question regarding the commission's capital requirements that are the minimum for the determinations of our minimum capital requirements and what the commission includes or excludes in the compilation of that requirement, and asked for the commission to take a look at that as a part of a variance request for the region, citing competition concerns in the region and other uncertainties in the region.
There were also six or seven members of the New Bedford City Council who wrote. Do you have
Okay.
that letter?
I didn't have that letter.
Maybe that got stopped at my desk. But it wasn't all the city councilors, but a number of the city councilors, including the city council president, wrote and called for an extension of until, I think, at least October.
On the extension requests, what I was going to recommend for the staff to be tasked with analyzing who was asking for what dates, how that matches with our background checks. That background checks was put forward as one of the reasons, and then we can come back to the commission with an analysis of that for the next meeting. And if indeed the commission wants to explore that as an issue, we could then put that forward for just further comment on whether or not the commission should consider moving forward on any sort of amendment to that application deadline. Because we just put forward general question about what do you think about the competition, competitive environment in Region C? What do you think about the deadline? If there's a specific task to review whether or not that deadline works or not, undoubtedly we might get further comments that might be valuable for the commission's consideration. On the second matter, perhaps the commission could task staff and/or our consultants to review the matter on whether or not this makes sense as an issue within the context of the region, and then we could bring that report back to the commission at the next meeting. There was a specific variance request that was put forward by MGE, and so potentially we could do the staff review. I'm not certain if you would want to actually hear from anyone at the next meeting or following meetings, but those are some alternatives for consideration.
Yeah, I was going to invite you to give your comments on this. I think it was.
Yeah, no, I think we should look at that variance request relative to the capital investment in the context of that region. I would note that as we've reviewed the Region B, eligible and ineligible costs relative to, that application, because that's part of the finance review, it is a very close to the threshold that we set forth in regulations. So it's not.
Region B is?
Region B is,
Oh, really?
yes.
Wow.
Region, would you say that again? I didn't quite follow that.
MGM,
Right.
the applicant for Region B, is very close to the threshold of 500 million when you exclude the ineligible costs as interpreted in our regulations, which is the medium-sized region of all three. So Region C is further below in terms of market penetration, which is why I think we should entertain the variance request that has been put forward. This was not an issue in Region A, but we always knew that that's the most lucrative region, if you will, in terms of market penetration. Now, there is still, and I say may, because there's still some leeway as to how some of these costs are interpreted or broken down. But nonetheless, that was the case from our review so far of Region B.
Well, and you had the other point about the schedule.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes, that's important. You touched on these, but there's two important elements on both sides at the beginning or prior to and after both the vote that takes place in a host community and or the scheduling of that referendum. One is before, which is our own investigations. That was a big effort that all happened at once and very intense in the both regions, but one that we really need to understand of all the applicants. So we look forward from direct feedback in terms of timing from Director Wells. But the other one is the reality that no applicant really sat down to look at the surrounding communities and negotiate all of these surrounding communities until they actually had a vote, which is very reasonable, to spend some real resources in terms of legal fees and traffic analysis beyond the host community until they really know whether their application is viable or not. You'll recall in our schedule, we always assume that those two activities would take place in parallel, but the reality is that they never did. There's no reason really to spend a lot of resources negotiating surrounding communities agreements without a vote of the host community.
So that would be a factor when you're doing your assessment.
When you're doing your,
I think it does make sense, particularly on the schedule, just to think through if we were going to entertain, as we are thinking about entertaining an extension, what exactly are the implications of that from all these standpoints. But I also think we ought to try to get this resolved pretty quick. And I think, it's time's running for people who are trying to decide whether. Sorry. Whether, whether.
Tension around.
It was like waiting for Commissioner Stebbins' vote. Anyway, so I'm not sure how many more times we ought to postpone this, but I think certainly, especially considering, but I think we should ask you all to look into the schedule and say, if we were going to extend it, what makes sense, all things considered. And if you want to, I'm pretty comfortable about the idea of the waiver, frankly. But if you wanted to have HLT or somebody take some rational look at it, but I would listen to the market on that one. I wouldn't want to superimpose our judgment to that. But either way, I think we should make decisions.
Chairman, I'm not saying that we'll be complete with our analysis, but perhaps if you would like to hear from the MG&E team at the next meeting, we can determine where we are in our analysis, but we could tentatively schedule that if you'd like.
I don't need to hear from the MG&E team. I read Bloom. That's the person who asked for the waiver.
Yeah, right. No, I don't think we do either.
I think we should rather hear from HLT in terms of, some of the analysis that they help us do already on Region B. When I first understood, really, when I...
Sorry, I was thinking of Commissioner Stebbins.
Sorry. When I first heard of the gap, if you will, between eligible and ineligible costs, it struck me as rather wide. But as I really looked at this in the context of Region B, it really is not. Some of those costs, we took the position, of the discretion that we were afforded, and the Gaming Act gives us all the discretion to include them as part of the capital investment or not. So.
Yeah, but we did, that's right, but we had reasons for doing it.
We did.
I think I assure you, thought we ought to have a discussion.
Right.
Okay. So, if we could make this decision in 2 weeks, that would be desirable.
The agenda for a couple of weeks is getting rather big.
Could we, well, could we drill down a little bit in that? There are some pieces of this we probably could decide in 2 weeks, the extension and the waiver piece. And the extension piece is the rationale set out for it in some of these letters is very interesting, and it seems to me it's time sensitive. So that even if we couldn't figure out the monetary piece, maybe we could figure out the waiver piece and the deadline extension piece at the next meeting, and then as fast as we can, the waiver piece too.
I don't feel terrible. I don't feel either one of them is a terribly difficult question, frankly. I do think, I don't know exactly what extension date makes the most sense, but I'm predisposed in favor of that, doing it.
As am I.
Right,
But,
and on the waiver as well. But anyway, so if we can do it, if we can do it in 2 weeks, great. If we can't, we can't.
but we're prepared to break it into pieces.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right, okay, that's all I was trying to say.
Yeah.
It really is 5 o'clock.
Yeah, right.
Let's get out of here.
Mr. Chairman, just want to mention, Director Day asked me, I think I mentioned in my remarks, Fall River had submitted a comment and they were opposing an extension.
Yes.
But I was unsure if I mentioned that.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not sure you did, but that was what triggered Commissioner Zuniga's.
Yes. My from their perspective, it makes sense, but from our perspective, there's a lot of surrounding communities where that this affects, and background investigation that gets prior to that, but this is very relevant.
Remembering all the difficulty that we had with the Foxwoods background check, getting the information completed, that might be a word to the wise. Okay, do we have anything else on the agenda?
A motion to adjourn. is the
All
next
right.
item.
Second.
All in favor?